Tonight, we embark on an exploration to uncover the ancient wisdom of Zen Buddhism regarding acceptance and surrender. We will delve into the obstacles that hinder our ability to flow with life rather than resist it. Before we proceed, feel free to share your current time and location. Through soothing tales and quiet teachings, we will navigate our way to a serene and beautiful peace that lies within our souls. So, comfortably close your eyes if you haven't done so yet. Allow your breathing to slow. There's no need to comprehend everything tonight. Simply allow yourself to listen. In listening, something within you will begin to soften. Let's commence with our first narrative. Once upon a time, a young monk resided in a mountain monastery. Each morning, he woke before dawn to care for the garden. The path leading to the garden meandered through a forest, where the ground remained soft from mountain springs. After rainfall, this pathway transformed into a thick ribbon of clinging mud. The young monk despised this mud. Every morning, he navigated the edges with great caution, aiming to keep his robes clean by stepping on rocks and roots to dodge the mess. When he finally reached the garden, he felt exhausted and frustrated. His peaceful ritual had turned into a struggle with the earth itself. One morning, following a heavy storm, the path was worse than it had ever been. The monk stood at the edge, gazing at the muddy river stretching before him. As he hesitated, he heard footsteps behind him. His teacher approached, walking steadily down the pathway. Without a moment's hesitation, the elder stepped directly onto the mud. His robes darkened as the earth splattered up, yet his expression remained tranquil. The young monk watched in astonishment. "Master, your robes will be ruined." The teacher smiled and kept walking. "The mud is present. I am present." We meet each other earnestly. The student hurried to catch up, still attempting to avoid the worst sections. Surely, it's wiser to remain clean to sidestep unnecessary mess. The master paused and looked back. "Tell me, how much energy do you expend each morning battling this path?" The young monk pondered for a moment. "Quite a lot, I suppose." "And how much energy do I expend?" "You simply walk." "Exactly. I just walk. The mud accepts my fate. My feet embrace the mud. There's no conflict, it's merely a meeting." They continued the rest of the journey in silence. Upon reaching the garden, the master approached the well and quietly washed his feet and the hem of his robes. The mud rinsed away effortlessly. What had appeared to be permanent was simply temporary. "You see," the teacher remarked, observing the brown water swirling away, "the mud itself was not the issue. My resistance to the mud would have been the true issue." Within this simple tale lies a truth that can alter how we confront each day. The young monk's struggle was not truly with the mud. It was with his rejection of what already was. His resistance transformed a simple walk into a source of tension. His unwillingness to accept the reality created suffering where none was necessary. This illustrates how resistance operates in our lives. We confront something unpleasant, a difficult conversation, an unexpected delay, an emotion we wish to avoid. Instead of addressing it head-on, we resist its existence. We squander energy attempting to alter the situation. We tire ourselves engaging in battles with what has already transpired. The Master grasped something profound. Acceptance does not signify joy over every circumstance. It means facing circumstances without the added weight of rejection. The mud remained mud. It was still a hassle. Yet, by accepting its existence, he could navigate through it peacefully. When we cease fighting what exists, we uncover something remarkable. Often, our resistance feels more uncomfortable than the very thing we resist. The dread of a challenge can outweigh the challenge itself. The narrative we create about why something shouldn't be occurring can amplify our distress far beyond the actual event. However, this does not equate to passivity. The Master still walked to the garden. He fulfilled his responsibilities, but he did so without the internal conflict that drains the spirit. He encountered the mud as a reality of the morning, not a personal affront from the universe. Observe in your own life where you expend energy battling what is already there, the climate you cannot change, the character of a challenging person, the pace of healing or improvement. These represent the muddy paths of daily life. You can tiptoe around them, exhausting yourself, or you can step ahead with an acceptance of what is true. This acceptance initiates with your breath. When you feel resistance within yourself, take a moment. What if you were to stop pushing against this moment and just experience it? Allow your breathing to soften now. Recognize how your body understands how to welcome each breath without contention. Your lungs do not resist the air. Your heart doesn't argue with its rhythm. There exists wisdom in this innate acceptance, a wisdom that can be applied to other facets of life. Embrace the understanding that meeting life directly, even amidst chaos, can provide more tranquility than struggling against it. Acceptance isn't defeat, it is intelligence. It represents the first step towards genuine freedom. In a village tucked away between mountains, the inhabitants had grown accustomed to their routines. This village was celebrated for its bright skies and gentle sunshine. Merchants frequently paused here, drawn by the delightful weather. The villagers took pride in this reputation and often spoke of their blessings in living where the sun seemed eternally bright. However, every region requires rainfall. The rivers sustaining the village originated from mountains where storms were essential. The forests surrounding them relied on water from the sky. Even their own gardens thrived best after a good soaking. Unfortunately, the villagers had overlooked this fact. They began to perceive rain as a nuisance. When clouds gathered, they would look up with concern. "Not today," they would whisper. "Please, not today." The rain of acceptance. In a quaint village, the residents constantly orchestrated their lives around forecasts, calling off gatherings at the mere suggestion of impending rain. Some resorted to placing charms and reflective surfaces in their homes, hoping to stave off any stormy weather. Then came a devastating drought. The river that had been a reliable source of water began to dwindle. Wells that had always been full started to run dry, and the once bountiful gardens began to fade away. Even as the longed-for clouds appeared, the villagers found themselves riddled with doubt. They yearned for rain, yet had conditioned themselves to shun it for so long. At the periphery of the village lived a wise elder who recollected a time when raindrops were embraced with joy, a time when people danced in delight at the first spring showers. With a heavy heart, She observed her neighbors grappling with their need for water while resisting the storms they had been trained to avoid for years. One fateful evening, as the sky swelled with long-awaited rain clouds, she made her way to the village square. The townsfolk hurried to close their windows, gather their laundry, and prepare to withstand the very thing they craved. The old woman stood in the center of the square, gazing skyward. As the first few drops began to fall, she did something unseen for ages. She spread her arms wide and tilted her face upward, allowing the rain to touch her skin as she intentionally refrained from seeking shelter. Children peeked from doorways, while adults observed from their windows. Here was a figure who welcomed what everyone had been taught to evade. As the drizzle evolved into a steady downpour, the elder began to beam with delight. Then, astonishingly, a little girl broke free from her mother's side and dashed into the square. She stood alongside the old woman, giggling as the raindrops cascaded onto her cheeks. Soon, another child joined them. Before long, a small group gathered in the rain, recalling a joy they had somehow overlooked: the sheer bliss of water descending from above, the excitement of finally receiving what was so desperately needed, and the uncomplicated joy of embracing nature's abundance. The adults clung to their shelters. Some dismissed this reckless joy, while others began to reminisce. They remembered the sensation of thirsting for rain and finally being gifted its arrival. They recalled the majesty of storms, the refreshing air that followed, and the vibrant life that returned to their surroundings. From that moment onward, as the clouds assembled, the village found itself split. Some persisted in shuttering their windows and grumbling, while others stepped outside, recalling that resisting the natural and necessary only led to suffering. They relearned the art of welcoming what was vital instead of fearing the uncontrollable. This tale reflects a fundamental aspect of humanity: our inclination to reject what we truly need simply because it disrupts our comfort. The villagers' aversion to rain proved more than inconvenient. It worked against their very well-being. They had blurred the lines between comfort and wisdom, mistaking control for safety. In this narrative, rain symbolizes all those vital yet uncomfortable facets of life: challenging discussions that clear tension, periods of rest that seem unproductive, sorrows that facilitate healing from loss, and hurdles that foster resilience. These experiences are essential for our growth, yet our ingrained resistance often frames them as burdens rather than nourishment. The old woman possessed a wisdom that her peers had forgotten: that embracing our needs, even when uncomfortable, can be liberating. This liberation extends beyond merely fulfilling immediate wants. It allows us to cease the exhausting struggle against our reality. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. Where might you be resisting something you genuinely need? Perhaps you crave tranquility but resist slowing your pace. Perhaps you wish to confront your grief but fill your time with distractions. Maybe a crucial conversation lingers on your to-do list as you continually postpone it. Such forms of resistance prevent you from obtaining the very support that could aid you. Acceptance doesn't imply actively seeking hardship. Rather, it means relinquishing the tendency to reject what is already present. When rain pours, choosing to stand in it can provide a sense of tranquility, not because rain is inherently enjoyable, but because battling against it while it falls only invites distress. This is the essence of what acceptance offers. It doesn't guarantee an easier path through life. Instead, it assures us that our relationship with adversity can become more enlightened. Rather than confronting two issues, the initial challenge and our resistance to it, we face the actual situation, which is typically more manageable than our narratives about why it shouldn't exist. This understanding is foundational to achieving deeper acceptance. It involves recognizing when we are contending with what has already transpired and consciously deciding to respond differently. Not because we must appreciate everything, but because tranquility holds greater value than the illusion of control. This realization unveils a pathway to liberation. If our resistance stems from our perceptions of events rather than the events themselves, then we possess more agency than we had ever acknowledged. We may not always alter what occurs, but we can start noticing and easing our instinctive rejection of our current circumstances. At times, this means stepping into the mud with the understanding that our feet can be cleaned later. Other times, it entails turning our faces to the rain that has already begun to descend. Occasionally, it simply requires us to allow the present moment to exist as it is instead of insisting on an alternate reality. The figures in these narratives were not extraordinary. They merely learned to collaborate with life rather than against it. They discovered that acceptance is neither a lofty spiritual notion nor an abstract ideal, but rather a practical wisdom, a method of traversing existence that conserves our energy for what is truly significant. Permit yourself to rest in the straightforward nature of this insight, recognizing that the journey toward peace often commences with acknowledging where you are unknowingly fostering unnecessary strife, where you are compounding resistance to what is inherently challenging. Let the breath flow freely as you embrace these simple truths. Embrace the flow. Allow all sensations to pass through you effortlessly. Gradually let your body settle in without the need to force relaxation. Permit your thoughts to enter and exit without attempting to control them. This practice is about acknowledging the present moment as it unfolds. Tonight, we delve deeper into one of life's most significant and liberating realizations. Everything is in a constant state of change. Nothing remains unchanged. Within this realization lies both grief and immense freedom. High in the Tibetan mountains, a group of monks thrived, dedicating themselves to an age-old craft. For generations, they meticulously crafted mandalas, elaborate sacred artworks composed of colored sand. These mandalas weren't mere trifles. They spanned entire floors, each grain placed with utmost care and precision. The process of creating a mandala could stretch over weeks, sometimes even months. Each morning began in silence as the monks gathered around the burgeoning circle of hues and designs. With calm hands and serene hearts, they added grain after grain of blue, red, yellow, and white sand. There were no hurried motions, no rush towards completion. Every moment spent in creation was sacred in itself. The mandalas were nothing short of breathtaking. People would journey for days just to behold them. The intricate patterns seemed to throb with vitality. The colors resonated like visible music. Spectators would stand at a distance from these sand artworks and felt a profound shift in their hearts. There was a beauty so pure, so complete, that it seemed to resonate with something eternal. One autumn, the monks were on the verge of completing their most ambitious mandala to date. After 3 months of tireless work, The design stretched across the entire width of their largest meditation hall. Every minute detail had been thoughtfully considered, refined, and perfected. This masterpiece was the culmination of thousands of hours of dedication, skill, and love. A novice monk named Tenzin had recently joined the community. He had previously worked on smaller sections of mandalas, but this was his first immersion into such a grand endeavor. As the final grains of sand were added and the last symbols took their flawless shape, he felt an overwhelming sense of pride and attachment to their collective creation. Later that evening, as the community united for their closing ceremony, Tenzin noticed ominous storm clouds forming outside. The wind stirred up, creating a knot of anxiety in his stomach. All summer had been marked by tranquility, but now, just as their work approached completion, nature appeared to be shifting. The elder monk leading the ceremony began traditional prayers, reflecting on the mandala's beauty, the devotion that birthed it, and the fleeting nature of existence itself. Tenzin struggled to gaze at the words being spoken as his eyes wandered towards the windows. The wind howled louder. As the ceremony drew to a close, the elder monk did something that stunned Tenzin. He gently took a ceremonial brush and began to disturb the mandala, blending the colors and returning the meticulously placed grains to a state of formlessness. The other monks joined him in reverence, yet without hesitation. Tenzin, filled with dismay, watched months of effort dissolve before him. "Master," he whispered urgently, "the storm. If we willingly destroy it, why worry about nature bringing about the same fate?" The elder paused his gentle dismantling and smiled. "Tell me, young friend, what brought you more pain? The wind that threatened our creation or your cling to keeping it unchanged?" Tenzin reflected on this. His fear regarding the storm had caused him distress, but observing this intentional dissolution felt oddly serene, even beautiful. "Now you are beginning to grasp," the elder went on. "The mandala was never intended to endure endlessly. Its perfection resided not in its permanence but in the love we put into every moment of its creation. That love endures, even as the sand returns to the earth." As they finished their careful dismantling, collecting the mixed sand to return to the mountain stream below, the wind rattled the windows even more fiercely. Yet Tenzin found himself devoid of fear. There was nothing left to lose or safeguard, only the memory of creation, the love that guided their hands, and the lesson now alive in his heart. "You see," the master said as they watched the colored sand flow into the stream, "we embraced impermanence not to become indifferent towards beauty. We engaged with it to love beauty freely, to create without attachment, giving our full attention to our actions while holding the outcomes lightly." That night, as Tenzin lay in his modest bed listening to the storm sweep across the mountain, a new understanding dawned on him. The mandala had imparted lessons not just about artistry but about existence. It taught him how to love unreservedly without insisting that anything must last indefinitely. It revealed how to work passionately while treating outcomes delicately. True security, he realized, arises not from making things permanent but from accepting their ephemeral nature. This ancient practice harbors wisdom capable of transforming how we cherish everything we hold dear. The monks recognized what many of us find difficult to accept, that the attempt to make the temporary everlasting breeds unending anxiety. Our attachment to maintaining things in their unchanging state often hinders us from fully savoring them while they are present. Consider how this manifests in your own existence. Reflect on the concerns surrounding your health, relationships, or the circumstances that bring you joy. Contemplate the energy you expend attempting to freeze moments meant to flow. Acknowledge the fear that taints beautiful experiences because they are bound to fade eventually. This is the anguish that emerges from resisting impermanence instead of dancing with it. Tenzin's anxiety about the storm was ultimately not about the wind or the weather. It was rooted in his desperate wish to hold on to something beautiful just as it was. His suffering stemmed not from change itself, but from his reluctance to accept it. When he learned to embrace impermanence, everything began to shift. The wisdom of ephemeral beauty. The serenity found in the creation of a sand mandala reflects a deep understanding of change and stability. This doesn't equate to apathy towards beauty or affection. The monks meticulously crafted their mandala, fully aware of its transient nature. Their attentiveness to each grain of sand was heightened by the consciousness that the act of creation was unique and irreplaceable. Embracing the fact that all things are fleeting ushers in a transformative experience. Rather than exhausting oneself in attempts to archive moments eternally, you begin to fully inhabit them. You're no longer only half participating in experiences while fretting about their conclusion. Instead, you dedicate yourself entirely to the present moment. Impermanence transitions from a source of anxiety to an invitation for mindfulness. The insightful teachings of the Master reveal a profound truth. The love, care, and attentiveness offered to ephemeral experiences are what truly endure. As the mandala returns to dust, the dedication that brought it to life lingers in the hearts of the monks. The beauty experienced during its creation integrates into their being in a manner immune to any storm. Reflect on the lessons of the sand mandala. Beauty is not diminished by its temporary existence. Creation retains its sacredness, even when outcomes are not everlasting. True peace comes not from wrestling to secure permanence, but from embracing the natural flow of existence. In a tranquil monastery garden, an elderly master gained the renown of being a sage, revered for his calm disposition and deep insights. Travelers from far-flung villages would come seeking his counsel on profound issues concerning life, death, and everything in between. However, those who were truly familiar with him recognized that his greatest teachings emerged not through spoken word but through the simplicity of his daily existence. For 4 decades, the Master tended to a modest garden. Each morning, he would awaken before dawn to walk amongst the plants, observing their growth, watering as necessary, and gently removing any weeds. The garden itself was uncomplicated. A few fruit trees, an array of vegetables, herbs for culinary and medicinal purposes, and flowers that graced the garden through various seasons. It wasn't elaborate but was nurtured with remarkable care. Visitors frequently praised the garden's aesthetic appeal, yet they also noted something else peculiar. The Master displayed no attachment to any specific plant or harvest. When drought destroyed his tomatoes, he composted them calmly and planted anew. When pests devoured his cherished herbs, he would analyze their behavior with curiosity instead of frustration. When unseasonable frosts damaged his fruit blossoms, he would prune the affected branches and trust in the blossoms of the following year. One spring morning, A diligent student named Kenji came to reside with the master for a year of study. Kenji was earnest and committed, yet plagued by worry. He was concerned about his meditation practice, his comprehension of the teachings, and whether his progression on the spiritual journey was swift enough. Most troubling of all was his anxiety about time, growing older, facing mortality, and the many ambitions he wished to fulfill before life's inevitable end. On one spring day, as Kenji assisted with the daily tasks in the garden, he observed the master investing special attention in a young cherry tree. This tree held a special place in the master's heart, having been planted many years prior in honor of his own teacher. Each year it graced the garden with exquisite pink blossoms, and come autumn, its leaves would burst into vibrant red before gently falling. While they worked side by side, Kenji inquired, "Master, do you not feel sorrow knowing this beautiful tree will one day die? Would you not desire for it to bloom eternally?" The master continued his nurturing work, spreading mulch around the tree's roots. "Tell me, Kenji, what do you perceive when you look at this tree?" "I see something cherished that won't endure. Something beautiful that time will eventually take away." The master considered this thoughtfully. "And what else do you observe?" Kenji focused his gaze further. The tree was starting to showcase its early spring buds, soon to be dressed in blossoms. "I see the flowers that are on the way." "Yes, and what more?" Kenji reflected deeper. He recognized the sturdy trunk and the network of roots hidden beneath the soil, its branches extending in every direction. "I see all the springs it has already shared with us, all the beauty it has offered before." "Very good. And what else do you see?" This inquiry was tougher, so Kenji paused, looking not only with his eyes but with his heart. Slowly, a realization began to emerge within him. "I see that it's alive right now, fully present, not striving to be anything other than what it is in this moment." The master smiled, continuing his work. "The tree has no anxiety about autumn while it prepares for spring. It doesn't hold back its blossoms out of fear for winter. It gives itself entirely to each season as it comes. It flows in the rhythm of existence, appearing and disappearing without resistance." They continued their work in a comfortable silence for a time, until the master spoke softly, making Kenji lean in closer to catch his words. "I've loved this tree for many years. I've witnessed its journey through drought, storms, seasons of plenty, and those of scarcity. I understand that someday, maybe soon, or perhaps many years from now, its life cycle will reach completion. When that day arrives, I will lovingly compost its body, just as I have with its growth." Kenji sensed a shift within him. "But how can you discuss it without sorrow?" "Who says I speak without sadness?" The master replied, "Sadness is inherent in loving something transient. Yet, I refuse to allow my sorrow regarding the tree's eventual end to hold me back from fully loving it right now. I do not permit my awareness of autumn to lessen my joy in spring." The master stood, brushing away soil from his hands. "This tree instructs me on how to live, how to give everything to each moment without fear of loss, how to love deeply without requiring permanence, How to discover freedom through acceptance rather than resistance. The everlasting cycle of existence. As days turned into weeks and the cherry blossom tree flourished into spectacular beauty, Kenji began to grasp the master's teachings more profoundly. He observed how the elder would sit beneath the blooming branches every morning, not attempting to prolong the blossoms, not capturing their beauty in photographs, nor reaching out to hold on to it. He simply embraced their ephemeral gift as it was offered. When the blossoms eventually drifted down, crafting a soft pink carpet below the tree, the master carefully collected them and placed them into his compost heap. His expression showed no sorrow, merely gratitude for what had transpired and anticipation for what lay ahead. He was already attentive to the early signs of new leaves, the next chapter in the tree's generous cycle. That autumn, as Kenji was preparing to leave the monastery and return to his life beyond its walls, he posed one last question to the master. How can I carry this wisdom with me? How do I remember to embody the tree when I fear losing what I hold dear? 0. 5. The master accompanied him to the garden gate. The cherry tree stood resplendent in its autumn hues, each leaf a unique blend of fiery red and gleaming gold. Keep this image close to your heart, the master instructed. Understand that this tree has never been more stunning than it is at this moment, adorned for its seasonal farewell. It teaches us that finales can hold as much beauty as beginnings when we approach them without resistance. And remember, the roots of the tree delve deep into soil that has been enriched by countless other trees that have lived and departed before it. Nothing is truly lost. Everything that exists, loves, and ultimately fades away becomes a part of the great continuum. Your anxiety about impermanence stems from the illusion that you stand apart from this flow, but you are inherently a part of it. You are embraced by it. As Kenji treaded down the mountain trail, carrying the essence of the master's lesson within him, he experienced a feeling he had never known before, a profound sense of belonging to the rhythm of existence. A trust that he could embrace love fully without the need for anything to be permanent. A peace that arose from accepting his role in the grand performance of appearing and disappearing that encompasses all living beings. This tale offers us an alternative approach to our awareness of impermanence, not merely as a theoretical concept, but as a lived experience of wisdom. The master didn't cultivate peace by pretending that nothing ceases to exist. He achieved peace by learning to love amidst the reality of incessant change. Observe how the master's acceptance of impermanence made him more engaged, not less. Because he recognized that the cherry blossoms would fall, he devoted attention to them as they flourished. Aware of the limited time he shared with the tree, he valued each season profoundly. His acceptance of endings amplified rather than diminished his capacity for love. This embodies the paradox of impermanence. When we cease trying to render transitory experiences permanent, we become more receptive to savoring them in their presence. When we acknowledge that everything we cherish will transform, we can love more openly without the ongoing anxiety of attempting to control outcomes beyond our reach. This does not remove the sadness that accompanies endings. The master understood that sadness is a natural response when we cherish something fleeting. However, his perspective mitigated the extra suffering that arises from wishing for the temporary to become permanent. It allowed him to encounter loss without succumbing to it, to mourn without being overwhelmed by sorrow. Out of this understanding emerges a distinct kind of bravery. The bravery to love deeply, fully aware that loss is inevitable. The bravery to commit wholeheartedly to relationships and endeavors that won't endure. The bravery to flourish completely in whatever season you find yourself, unencumbered by the fear of autumn. The profound lesson of impermanence is not that life lacks meaning because everything ends. Rather, it teaches that life gains infinite value precisely because it cannot be replicated. Each moment arrives singularly. Each breath is unique. Every individual you hold dear is a one-of-a-kind manifestation of consciousness that will never exist again in this exact manner. When the monks dismantled their sand mandala, they were not proclaiming that beauty is insignificant. They were celebrating the notion that beauty can be so pure that it does not require permanence to be deemed perfect. When the master cherished his cherry tree while acknowledging its eventual passing, he was not being indifferent or aloof. He was embracing it exactly as it was, a transient flowering in the vast garden of existence. As your breathing slows and your body settles into a moment of rest, release the need to cement anything in permanence. Allow yourself to appreciate this instant for what it offers without the demand for it to last forever. Let yourself love without the expectation of guarantees. Embrace the fullness of living within the reality of unending change. This is your invitation to exist like the tree, to blossom fully when the moment for blooming arrives, to let go gracefully when the moment for parting comes, to place your trust in the seasons of your own journey without attempting to dictate their timing, to offer everything to this moment while holding tomorrow with gentility. By accepting impermanence, you lose nothing of substance. You merely release the exhausting illusion that you should make transient things everlasting. What you gain is immeasurable. Liberation from the continuous anxiety of possible loss. The capacity to love without trepidation. The ability to admire beauty without the desire to possess it. Faith in the natural currents of existence. As we journey deeper together, we delve into something many of us find even more challenging than accepting external shifts. We examine how to greet ourselves with kindness, how to treat the person you know best, yourself, with the same tenderness you would offer to a beloved friend. Perhaps you recognize this internal dialogue, the one that criticizes your errors, the one that proclaims you're not advancing quickly enough on any meaningful path. This inner critic touches us all. Yet Buddhist wisdom presents an alternative perspective, the path of gentle awareness. In a serene monastery nestled atop towering mountains, there resided a young monk named Dogen, who sought solace and enlightenment. He had immersed himself in numerous texts about meditation and mindfulness, grasping the teachings on an intellectual level and yearning to embody the tranquil presence he admired in his mentors. With great dedication, Dogen committed himself to practice. Rising with the dawn, he engaged in meditation, remained silent for most of his day, subsisted on simple meals, donned unadorned robes, and endeavored to nurture the equanimity he believed was essential for a devoted practitioner. Yet, his mind had its own agenda. During meditation, rather than experiencing the tranquil void he anticipated, Dogen found his thoughts spiraling wildly. He would map out potential conversations, relive past humiliations, or fret about his meditation technique. Upon realizing his mind had drifted, he would hastily return his focus to his breathing, only to find himself ensnared in thought once more moments later. The more this occurred, the greater Dogen's frustration grew. Months had passed since he began practicing, and he still felt like a novice. As he endured challenging meditation sessions, he would observe fellow monks sitting in perfect stillness and presume they had reached a state of blissful focus while he grappled with foundational aspects of mindfulness. After particularly arduous meditation experiences, Dogen would mentally compile a list of his shortcomings. I was unfocused for mere moments. My back ached, and I continuously shifted positions. I grew irritable when that bird outside kept chirping. I'm hopeless at this. I'll never attain true wisdom. This internal dialogue became a near-constant cacophony. Dogen realized he was facing two dilemmas instead of one. Not only did his mind wander during meditation, but he was now investing significant energy into self-judgment for being distracted. One morning, following a notably disheartening meditation session, Dogen approached his teacher, an experienced monk named Ijo, who had dedicated over 40 years to practice. Dogen bowed deeply and revealed his struggles. "Master, I've dedicated myself to this discipline for months, yet my thoughts remain chaotic. I can hardly manage a few moments of genuine concentration. The other monks possess natural gifts that I seem to lack. I'm beginning to question my suitability for this path." Master Ijo listened with quiet understanding, his expression radiating gentle concern rather than judgment. After Dogen concluded, the teacher remained silent for a brief while before responding softly. "Tell me, Dogen, when you recognize that your mind has wandered during meditation, what is your initial reaction?" "I attempt to return to my breath immediately, Master." "And how do you feel upon realizing your distractions?" Dogen reflected before replying, "I feel frustration, disappointment in myself, and sometimes even anger." "Do these feelings aid you in attaining greater focus?" Ijo inquired. "No, Master, they seem to create even more disruption." Master Ijo nodded knowingly. "I see. Now, consider this. When a small child is learning to walk, what happens when they stumble?" "They get back up and try again," Dogen responded. "Do they waste time criticizing themselves for falling?" "No, they simply continue their attempts." "And what if their parents constantly berated them each time they fell, labeling them failures at walking? What effect would that have on their learning?" A moment of clarity illuminated Dogen's expression. It would make the learning process much more challenging. It would instill fear and self-doubt. Master Ijo smiled gently. "Precisely. Now, tell me, who has been the harshest critic in your meditation journey?" "I have been," Dogen admitted softly. "And has this self-criticism propelled your practice forward?" "No. It has compounded my struggles." Ijo leaned closer slightly. "Dogen, you came to this place seeking wisdom and tranquility, yet you have been treating your own mind as an adversary to conquer rather than a companion to be understood. You expect to master in months what many others devote years to learning. This is not wisdom. It's a form of violence masquerading as spiritual endeavor." They sat in contemplative silence as these words resonated. Then Master Ijo continued, "True meditation isn't about coercing your mind into perfect stillness. It's about nurturing a compassionate and aware relationship with whatever arises in your mind. When thoughts emerge, observe them with curiosity rather than judgment. When your mind wanders, gently guide it back, much like you would help a friend find their way home." "But Master," Dogen countered, "doesn't accepting my wandering mind imply I will never gain concentration?" Ijo posed a question. "Have you noticed that your mind tends to wander?" "Yes, constantly," Dogen replied. "And in that noticing, isn't it a form of awareness?" Dogen paused, re-evaluating his focus. "I suppose it is. Every time you acknowledge your mind drifting, you are engaging in a moment of mindfulness. The wandering itself is not the issue. The true problem lies in your conflict with that wandering. This conflict obstructs your ability to appreciate the awareness that recognizes distractions." Master Ijo proposed an alternative approach. "For the upcoming week, I want you to engage in meditation with one simple intention. Rather than striving to suppress thoughts, practice welcoming them kindly. When you become aware that your mind is wandering, gently tell yourself, 'Hello, thinking.' Then kindly return your focus to your breath. Treat your distracted mind as you would a cherished but easily distracted child." "What if I still find myself constantly distracted?" Dogen asked. "Then you will have ample opportunities to cultivate kindness," Ijo responded. Over the next few days, Dogen embraced this new methodology. When he found his mind drifting into planning or worrying, instead of chastising himself, he would silently greet the thought with "hello, planning," or "hello, worrying," using the same warmth one would reserve for an old friend, and then redirect his attention back to his breath. A remarkable transformation began to unfold. The kinder he welcomed his wandering mind, the more profound his understanding became. The journey of compassionate understanding. Within the mind, Dogen found that thoughts lost their grip on him as he practiced self-kindness. Instead of getting tangled in extensive narratives, he quickly recognized them, allowing himself to return to the present moment with greater ease. What once felt like a struggle during meditation transformed into a gentle dialogue. More significantly, this newfound kindness in formal meditation began influencing Dogen's entire self-perception. When he faltered in the monastery, whether spilling a bowl or breaking silence, he reacted with curiosity instead of harsh criticism. "Ah, clumsiness has arrived," or "Ah, impulsiveness is present," he might say, before taking the appropriate steps to rectify the situation. After several weeks of this approach, Dogen shared with Master Ijo that his meditation journey had shifted, not because his mind had ceased its wandering, but because his relationship with that wandering had entirely evolved. "Master, I've understood a crucial lesson. The mind drifts because that's the essence of an untrained mind. Resisting this natural tendency results in suffering, while embracing it with kindness paves the way for genuine growth." Master Ijo smiled and inquired, "And what more have you uncovered?" Dogen replied, "The awareness identifying the wandering mind is inherently stable. It has always existed, observing everything with complete focus. I was simply too consumed with the fight to notice it." Indeed, Self-compassion does not signify weakness or lack of discipline. It unveils the strength that has always been beneath the turmoil. It shows you that you possess the very awareness you thought could only be attained through force. This narrative sheds light on a vital truth about spiritual practices and personal development. The aspect of Dogen that recognized his wandering thoughts was already awake and alert. However, his rigid self-assessment generated a cacophony within that obscured this innate awareness. This pattern is prevalent in human experiences. When we yearn to change something within ourselves, we often wage war against our current state. Yet, this internal strife only amplifies the very behaviors we wish to alter. Battling our anxiety makes us anxious about our anxiety. Judging our anger induces frustration about our anger. Criticizing our perceived lack of progress breeds irritation about our frustrations. In contrast, self-compassion provides an alternative pathway. Rather than coercing ourselves into an unrealistic ideal, we practice engaging with our true experiences through gentle kindness. This doesn't suggest passivity in our quest for growth. Instead, it cultivates an inner atmosphere where organic growth can thrive. Picture learning a new skill. When mastering a musical instrument, harsh words from an instructor can foster tension that hinders progression. Conversely, encouragement paired with gentle guidance nurtures learning. Your self-relationship can adhere to the same principle. Compassion towards making mistakes fosters improvement, while severe judgment establishes a strain that often halts the growth you desire. Self-compassion also brings to light the universal nature of struggle. Everyone embarking on a meditation journey encounters wandering thoughts. Each individual endeavoring to grow spiritually confronts inner obstacles. Every human makes mistakes and navigates through life imperfectly. When we regard our personal challenges as indications of failure, we overlook this fundamental truth about the human experience. The Buddhist interpretation of self-compassion is rooted in wisdom rather than mere sentimentality. It acknowledges that harsh self-assessment stems from a lack of understanding of growth and transformation. True advancement unfolds gradually, marked by setbacks and breakthroughs in unpredictable sequences. Expecting linear development towards a perfect state is akin to anticipating a tree to grow straight towards the sun. Master Ejo's teachings about meeting thoughts with kindness hint at profound insights. The awareness that greets a wandering mind remains untouched by those thoughts. It possesses enough spaciousness to incorporate all forms of mental activity without being overwhelmed by any of it. Self-compassion assists us in recognizing and resting in this innate expansiveness. The monks in our tale realize that spiritual practice isn't about aiming for perfection, but forming a deep connection with your actual experiences and addressing them with growing wisdom and kindness. This intimacy encompasses recognizing your limitations, patterns, and areas needing development, all enveloped in a spirit of acceptance rather than conflict. As Dogen unearthed, this method doesn't lead to complacency. It unlocks energy previously trapped in self-conflict, allowing it to be channeled into real growth. When you're not expending mental resources battling your humanity, that energy opens up for presence, learning, and genuine transformation. Consider how your body feels when you think about treating yourself with the same kindness you would extend to a beloved friend in turmoil. Notice the changes in your breathing, the tension in your chest or shoulders when you visualize facing your flaws with gentleness instead of reproach. In a temple celebrated for its exquisite gardens, there resided a sage named Myoan, renowned throughout the land for her wisdom and compassion. Pupils ventured from afar to learn from her, enchanted by stories of her patient mentorship and profound insights into the Dharma. Yet, those closest to Myoan were aware of something that might astonish her many admirers. Despite years of practice and instruction, she grappled with bouts of intense self-doubt. Occasionally, she questioned whether she truly comprehended the teaching she imparted. At times, she wondered if her guidance was genuinely benefiting her students or hindering their paths. Occasionally, she felt like a fraud, fearful that others might unveil her as just another imperfect human being, fumbling toward insight. For many years, Myoan had carefully concealed her uncertainties. She thought that, as an experienced teacher, she should have outgrown such doubts. She feared that acknowledging confusion would sap her credibility in guiding others. Thus, she kept these thoughts to herself, confiding in no one, not even her closest Dharma friends. One autumn, a young pupil named Sat began her journey at the temple. Bright and committed, she was also a perfectionist, often overly critical of herself. During their daily meetings, Sat would reveal her struggles with meditation, her voice heavy with shame. She described her wandering thoughts, her emotional upheavals, her inability to maintain calmness with a self-loathing tone that was tough to bear. "Teacher, I meditate every day, yet I still feel consumed by anger and jealousy. I read the sutras, but I can't tap into the peace they speak of. I see other students having insights I can't reach. Is there something fundamentally wrong with me that stops me from gaining wisdom?" Each week, Myoan offered gentle support, reassuring Sat that spiritual growth requires time, that challenges are a part of the journey, and that comparing herself to others often leads to unnecessary suffering. However, despite this guidance, Sat remained harshly judgmental about her own experience. Observing Sat's internal battle, Myoan began to recognize something unsettling. The student's severe self-assessment mirrored the inner voice of self-criticism that Myoan herself had concealed for years. Sat was externalizing feelings that Myoan had kept buried. The teacher realized that she could not effectively guide her student towards self-kindness while she struggled with self-neglect. One evening, as the autumn rains began to fall, Myoan made a challenging decision. In their next meeting, when Sat again expressed her doubts with evident shame, the teacher chose to respond with uncharacteristic openness. "Sat, I want to share something I've never revealed to any student. I have been practicing and teaching for many years, and I still face doubts nearly every day. Just this morning, before our talk, I questioned whether I had any wisdom worth imparting. I doubted whether my understanding of the Dharma was refined enough to lead others." Sat looked up, taken aback. She had presumed that a teacher, especially one as esteemed as Myoan, had moved past such basic struggles. Myoan continued softly, "For a long time, I thought that having these doubts indicated a flaw in my practice. I believed that experienced practitioners should always feel secure and clear-headed. But recently, I've started to consider whether my shame about these doubts causes more suffering than the doubts themselves. But teacher, if even you have uncertainties, how can any of us hope to find peace? That's the exact misconception I'd like to clarify. I've begun to see that doubt is not the enemy. Doubt can embody wisdom. It can keep us grounded, induce questioning, and avert spiritual arrogance. The issue is not the existence of doubt. The challenge lies in believing that doubt signifies we are on the wrong path. Mayan settled more comfortably on her cushion, her typical teaching demeanor softening into a more personal exchange. I've come to learn something vital through my own battle with self-judgment. When I approach my doubts and confusions with gentleness, rather than attempting to eradicate them, they become less overpowering. They cease to dictate how I view myself or my practice. I can acknowledge uncertainties without concluding that this equates to failure. How do you practice this, teacher? I've learned to communicate with my doubtful thoughts as I would with a concerned friend. When the inner voice whispers that I don't understand the Dharma profoundly enough, I respond within myself, yes, doubt is present. That's all right. Every learner experiences uncertainty. This doesn't erase the doubt, but it completely alters my relationship with it. Sat in silence for several moments, absorbing this newfound insight. Finally, she inquired, "Does being kind to yourself reduce your drive to improve?" Mayan smiled. "Actually, it's been the contrary. When I stopped squandering energy battling my humanness, I found more energy available for real learning. When I let go of the expectation that my spiritual journey should adhere to an idealized timetable, I was able to appreciate the genuine progress I was making. Self-kindness unveiled insights that self-criticism had obscured. Over the subsequent weeks, Mayan disclosed more of her own learning journey to Saturday. She shared instances when her meditation felt uninspired and mechanical, times when she wrestled with fundamental teachings, moments when her reactions to challenging students exposed her own unhealed areas. However, she presented these experiences not as admissions of failure, but as reflections of the continuous nature of spiritual growth. I once believed that awakening was about reaching a final destination where struggle ceased, Mayan clarified during one of their discussions. However, I'm beginning to realize that awakening could be more about how we engage with our struggles rather than eliminating them. It may concern responding to our challenges with growing wisdom and kindness rather than transcending difficulties entirely. This shift in perspective began to reshape Sat's entire approach to her practice. Rather than meditating with the sole purpose of eradicating undesirable experiences, she began to sit with a sense of curiosity about whatever arose. When jealousy surfaced in her mind, instead of immediately condemning it as a sign of spiritual failure, she would observe it with gentle interest. "Ah, jealousy seems to be visiting today. What sensations does it evoke in my body? What thoughts accompany it? How long does it typically linger?" The evolution in Sat's relationship with her experiences was gradual yet profound. She still encountered anger, jealousy, and confusion, but these emotions no longer held the same dominion over her spirit. Instead, she learned to welcome them as part of her journey, gaining valuable lessons in the process. Embracing our own humanity. A journey of self-compassion. Carrying the extra load of shame can be burdensome. Without the additional anguish of self-criticism, emotions can flow through us more freely. akin to weather patterns traversing an unclouded sky. Perhaps more unexpectedly, both teacher and student observed that this kind of method seemed to expedite Sato's evolution rather than stifle it. When she diverted less energy toward resisting her humanity, she was able to devote more focus to authentic awareness. In the absence of evaluating her worth based on the presence or lack of specific emotions, she approached her internal landscape with genuine inquisitiveness instead of strategic manipulation. Several months later, Sato confided in Myoan a realization that surfaced during her morning contemplation. "Teacher, I believe I've unearthed something significant. I was striving to mold myself into someone deserving of self-compassion instead of practicing compassion for the individual I already am. I assumed I needed to earn kindness from myself through self-improvement. Yet, self-compassion isn't a reward for high spirituality. It's the bedrock upon which genuine spiritual progress builds." Myoan nodded, filled with gratification. "Exactly. What else have you come to realize?" Sato pondered briefly. That my harsh self-criticism was actually rooted in pride. It presupposed I should be further ahead in my journey, that I should be someone other than who I truly am. Embracing self-compassion is inherently more humble. It acknowledges my status as a human being learning gradually, making missteps, and evolving in fits and starts just like everyone else. Beautifully said. How has this insight influenced your interactions with your peers? Sato contemplated this query. I find myself less critical of their challenges because I've lessened my own self-judgment. When I witness another grappling with envy or anger, I can see reflections of my own experiences in theirs. This fosters connection, not comparison. From then onward, Myoan integrated more transparency regarding her own continuous learning within her teachings, not in a way that undermined her role as a mentor, but in a manner that exemplified the self-compassion she aimed to inspire in her students. This shift allowed students to recognize that spiritual maturity includes a readiness to confront limitations and uncertainties without shame. The environment of the temple gradually transformed as this approach permeated the community. Students began to express their true struggles rather than presenting sanitized versions of their practices. Instructors acknowledged their personal areas for growth as well. The entire community practiced the honest self-acceptance that enables real transformation. Years later, after Sato had stepped into the role of a teacher herself, she frequently shared the lesson imparted through Myoan's openness about her vulnerabilities. Self-compassion is not merely a consolation for those who fall short of tangible spiritual achievements. It is the mindset that facilitates true accomplishment. This narrative unveils a fundamental truth regarding the connection between self-acceptance and spiritual development. Myoan's readiness to recognize her own ongoing challenges did not diminish her wisdom. Instead, it illuminated the very quality that rendered her an effective educator, the capacity to address human experiences, including her own, with kindness rather than judgment. The transition from concealing her uncertainties to confronting them with compassion-released energy that had been held captive in the exhausting effort to uphold a flawless image. This energy transformed into greater presence and deeper comprehension. Her openness also granted others the permission to engage more authentically with their own experiences. Notice how self-compassion in this narrative is neither sentimental nor indulgent. It doesn't excuse unskillful actions or circumvent the genuine work required for growth. Rather, it fosters the internal environment where honest self-reflection becomes achievable. When you're unafraid of uncovering your imperfections, you can examine more clearly the aspects that warrant attention. The Buddhist path involves nurturing what is often referred to as wise discernment. This skill allows one to perceive reality without getting ensnared in reactive responses to what is observed. Self-compassion bolsters wise discernment by alleviating the fear and shame that frequently distort self-perception. As Sato learned to approach her jealousy with curiosity rather than self-criticism, she could examine its patterns with greater clarity. She was able to recognize what triggered these feelings, how they manifested in her body, the thoughts that accompanied them, and their typical duration. This clarity naturally prompted more thoughtful responses. However, such an exploration would have been impractical if she had spent most of her energy condemning herself for experiencing jealousy in the first place. This highlights a paradox often encountered by spiritual practitioners. Acceptance of oneself as one currently is forms the groundwork for effortless transformation. Not because one is striving to change, but because acceptance engenders space for deeper wisdom to rise. When you cease to battle against your present experiences, energy becomes accessible for responding to them with greater skill. The story further illustrates how self-compassion influences relationships with others. When Myoan ceased to conceal her own struggles, she became more adept at assisting Sato with hers. As Sato nurtured a kinder relationship with her personal challenges, she naturally extended greater understanding to her fellow students facing comparable trials. This reality is unsurprising when one considers how internal and external relationships often reflect one another. If you're harsh on your humanity, you're likely to be impatient with the imperfections of others. Conversely, when you approach your own mishaps with kindness and a desire to learn, you're more inclined to respond to the errors of others with wisdom instead of judgment. True humility involves recognizing your place within the collective timeline of human learning. This understanding does not foster complacency. Rather, it cultivates a realistic perspective on what growth genuinely involves, which, paradoxically, propels more effective efforts toward that growth. Every moment counts. The art of embracing your journey, a Zen perspective. Experiencing life with a lens of kindness instead of criticism opens up a fresh path for growth. It's not about obligation, it's about opportunity. Self-kindness is consistently available as an alternative to self-condemnation. When you nurture yourself as a companion rather than an adversary, you enhance the very progress you're striving for. Take a moment to settle into this realization. Growth occurs organically when it's not hindered by severe self-judgment. Awareness flourishes naturally when it is fostered by compassion. Accepting your current situation not only creates the space for new potential to surface, but it does so not through sheer force, but by gracefully eliminating the internal resistance to what is genuinely present in this moment. As we advance in our shared journey, we will uncover how embracing others as they are can paradoxically nurture more genuine connections and natural development than any attempts to change them could ever achieve. In a serene mountain village, there existed a modest temple where a wise master named Hakuin had offered teachings for over 2 decades. Students traveled from neighboring towns, eager to learn meditation and the principles of Dharma, lured by Hakuin's reputation for insight and clarity. Most students typically remained for several months, absorbed what they needed, and returned to their everyday lives filled with gratitude. However, one student stood apart. His name was Jishin, and he had been a regular at the temple for almost 3 years. Unlike his peers, who seemed to assimilate the teachings with ease, Jishin challenged nearly every concept. When Hakuin addressed the necessity of relinquishing attachments, Jishin would interject with inquiries about the morality of attachments that inspire people to care for their loved ones. Should the master touch on the transient nature of emotions? Jishin would adamantly argue that certain emotions deserve permanence and that acknowledging their fleeting essence was reckless. In group meditation, Jishin's restlessness was apparent. He would sigh dramatically, shuffle loudly, and sometimes leave before concluding the session. When other students shared their insights and discussion, Jishin would frequently counter by illuminating the deficiencies or misconceptions in their understanding. His presence created palpable tension amid what had previously been a tranquil learning environment. Numerous students approached Hakuin in private, expressing their annoyance over Jishin's behavior. They suggested that perhaps he wasn't ready to engage with these teachings, or that another style of practice may suit him better. Some even insinuated that the master should consider asking Jishin to leave. Hakuin listened to these grievances with his typical patience, but he did not show Jishin the door. Instead, he continued imparting lessons as he regularly did, neither sidestepping Jishin's interruptions nor indulging in protracted arguments with him. When Jishin would challenge a point, Hakuin would attentively listen and then carry on with his lesson plan. If Jishin disrupted a meditation session, Hakuin remained centered in his own stillness without attempting special adjustments or corrections. This strategy left some of the newer students perplexed. They anticipated their instructor would take a more active approach in managing the disruptive student. However, the more experienced students began to notice something intriguing. Hakuin's steadfast acceptance of Jishin's challenging behavior was itself a form of teaching. The master exemplified precisely the kind of calm, non-reactive presence he had been articulating in his Dharma talks. One evening, following a particularly taxing session where Jishin had questioned nearly every aspect of the teachings, a senior student named Endo approached Hakuin during a walking meditation. "Master, I don't grasp your approach with Jishin. His incessant arguments seem to disrupt everyone's learning, including his own. Wouldn't it be kinder to assist him in finding a practice environment that better fits his temperament?" Hakuin continued to stroll leisurely along the garden path. "Tell me, Endo, when you confront someone in your life who annoys you, what do you generally do?" Endo replied, "I try to steer clear of them if possible. If avoidance isn't an option, I aim to change the topic or quickly end the interaction." Hakuin then asked, "And how successful is this method in fostering your patience with difficult individuals?" Endo pondered this candidly. "Not very often. I suppose I just grow more sensitive to the behaviors that irritate me." "Precisely. So in your day-to-day life, you engage in the practice of avoiding discomfort. Yet you arrive at the temple hoping to cultivate equanimity. How can you learn to remain calm among challenging individuals if you only practice with accommodating ones?" They continued walking in silence for a few more steps, allowing this new perspective to resonate. But Master, surely there's a distinction between accepting someone's challenging personality and letting them disrupt the learning experience for others. Hakuin paused beside a tranquil pond where the evening light danced upon the calm water. Let me pose another question. When Jishin argues during a teaching session, what effect does it have on your own mind? Endo answered, I feel frustrated, occasionally angry. I begin to think about how he's wasting everyone's time. And when he is restless during meditation, I find my attention diverted away from my own practice. Hakuin replied, so, Jishin's behavior unveils areas where your own equanimity is still maturing. Endo contemplated this reluctantly. Yes, I suppose that's true. Then perhaps he offers you something invaluable. Perhaps he is revealing exactly where your practice needs to deepen. If you only meditate among individuals who sit perfectly still, how will you ever learn to retain awareness amid distraction? Their dialogue unfolded over several evenings, allowing Endo to internalize the Master's viewpoint more profoundly. Hakuin elaborated that Jishin's confrontational nature wasn't something to be eradicated, but rather comprehended. Some individuals learn by challenging ideas against their existing beliefs. Others process their understanding through contrasting perspectives, navigating acceptance. As a practitioner, Hakuin pointed out that Jishin, while challenging, was not trying to be an obstacle. Rather, he was seeking clarity. His queries, though sometimes combative in nature, stem from a true bewilderment about the application of these teachings to everyday life. Dismissing his inquiries or instructing him to leave would deny him the chance to learn. Forcing him to accept concepts before he could process his uncertainties would only lead to a superficial grasp. Hakuin then considered the impact on others in the group. Ultimately, their reactions to Jishin would dictate the outcome. If they embraced his presence as a chance to cultivate genuine patience and compassion, he would inadvertently serve as their teacher. Conversely, if they chose to judge him and wish for a different situation, they would invite their own suffering and miss out on valuable lessons. Months passed, and a remarkable shift began to unfold. Jishin's resistance became less frequent and more reflective. He shifted from outright rejection of new teachings to attentively listening, asking meaningful questions, and presenting his doubts in a more respectful manner. His meditation posture became more stable, and although he still sometimes exited sessions prematurely, he did so quietly, avoiding disruption. More significantly, others experienced noticeable transformations within themselves. Those who initially found Jishin the most exasperating discovered a remarkable increase in their own patience in daily life. They became less reactive to difficult colleagues, more understanding towards family members with frustrating habits, and more adept at maintaining calm in social challenges. During an evening discussion, Endo expressed this realization to Hakuin. Master, I believe I finally grasp it. Jishin wasn't a problem to be fixed. Our reactions to him were the real opportunity to learn. Hakuin probed further, and what insights have you gained? Endo reflected, I've found that attempting to alter others can be draining and often futile. However, using others' challenging behaviors as a means to practice patience truly works. It nurtures the qualities I aspire to cultivate." Hakuin smiled knowingly. "Indeed. And what else?" Endo added, "I've also seen how Jishin changed organically when he felt accepted rather than judged. When we ceased resisting his argumentative nature, he no longer felt the need to defend himself so vigorously." Hakuin commended him. "Excellent. You have recognized that acceptance often provides a foundation for natural transformation, whereas force fosters resistance." Years later, as Endo stepped into the role of a teacher, he frequently shared with his students the invaluable lesson Jishin had unintentionally imparted. "Challenging individuals are not barriers to your spiritual progress," he would assert. "They are precious opportunities to work through difficult emotions as they arise. They show you if your equanimity is authentic or merely an abstract concept." This narrative unveils a profound reality regarding the effects of acceptance on relationships. Hakuin's approach with Jishin illustrates that efforts to change others often backfire, while embracing them opens avenues for organic growth. This does not imply condoning harmful behaviors, but it does require acknowledging that your peace cannot hinge on others conforming to your ideals. The students' frustrations with Jishin ultimately highlighted their own areas of responsiveness. When someone evokes strong emotions within you, those reactions reveal where your equanimity needs deepening. Rather than perceiving these encounters as problems to resolve, consider them as instructors indicating where practice is warranted. The master recognized something that often goes against common belief. Resistance can reinforce what you're resisting. When we confront someone's irritating traits, they can become more entrenched. Acceptance, on the other hand, fosters an environment where individuals can loosen their defensive patterns and allow their better selves to flourish more effortlessly. This does not suggest passivity or enduring mistreatment. It may at times be necessary to set boundaries, and this can be done without judgment or resentment. Choosing to limit contact with those who persistently create turmoil is possible, while still holding positive intentions for them internally. Boundaries tend to be more effective when they stem from clarity rather than anger. Jishin's evolution exemplifies how individuals often soften when they experience acceptance rather than judgment. Much of challenging behavior arises from feeling unheard or critiqued. Once that pressure subsides, the defensive facets of personality may relax naturally. Perhaps most importantly, cultivating acceptance in tricky interactions enhances your capacity for patience and empathy across all relationships. If you can stay centered around someone who provokes a strong reaction, nurturing tranquility amidst less challenging individuals becomes easier. Difficult relationships transform into invaluable training grounds for the very qualities you want to embody. In that same mountainous region lived an elderly woman known as Grandmother Suki, who had dedicated much of her life to practicing Zen. Renowned for her kindness and insightful wisdom, people flocked to her modest home, seeking guidance on family concerns, work troubles, and spiritual dilemmas. Among her acquaintances was one neighbor who constantly tested her patience. Mr. Tanaka resided next door and held loud opinions on virtually everything. He vocally criticized other neighbors, condemned local authorities, debated shopkeepers, and frequently expressed his discontent about the changes happening in the village. Every morning, Mr. Tanaka would stand in his garden and declare various observations about the world around him. "The youth of today have lost all respect," he would proclaim to anyone who could hear him. "The market prices are outrageous. The weather is completely wrong for this season. Everything was better in the past." Most neighbors, having learned from experience, wisely chose to steer clear of Mr. Tanaka, about or enjoyed. With each interaction, Grandmother Suki felt them growing closer as an unlikely pair, forming a unique bond based on mutual respect and understanding. One day, as winter approached and the leaves began to fall, Mr. Tanaka remarked on the beauty of the season. "Isn't it remarkable how the colors change?" he said, almost wistfully. Suki smiled, recognizing the shift in tone. "It truly is. Each season brings its own beauty, doesn't it?" From there, their conversations began to shift even more. Instead of focusing solely on the negatives in life, Mr. Tanaka began to also express gratitude for small joys: the warmth of a cup of tea, the laughter of children at play, the comfort of familiar routines. Suki found herself enlivened by these discussions, experiencing her own sense of hope bloom. She realized that, through her willingness to simply engage with him openly, she had opened a space where Mr. Tanaka could flourish as well, expressing his emotions in a way that felt more authentic and genuine. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but with each exchange, both Grandmother Suki and Mr. Tanaka learned from one another. Where once there had been a dialogue riddled with criticism and defensiveness, now there was room for exchange, exploration, and empathy. This blossoming companionship resonated within their small community, allowing others to witness a newfound respect and understanding between two neighbors who had, for far too long, struggled to relate to one another. Weeks later, on another spring morning, as they stood by the garden fence, Mr. Tanaka turned to Suki with a contemplative expression. "You know, I think I've been thinking differently lately. There are things that worry me, yes, but I've also started noticing what I appreciate in my life, like my porch in the evening light. I guess I have you to thank for that." Grandmother Suki felt a warmth spread through her at his words. "I'm glad to hear that. It's astonishing how sharing our experiences can help us see the world in a different light. Not everything has to be a complaint. Sometimes it's just about sharing where we are on our journey." As the seasons continued to change around them, the connection between them deepened. Mr. Tanaka still voiced his concerns, but he did so with a newfound softness, which Suki welcomed with open arms. In listening to him, she had cultivated her own understanding of compassion and acceptance, creating a ripple effect that influenced their small village. Their story became an example of how simple acceptance can foster deep connections, a reminder that even the rawest expressions of negativity could mask a longing for understanding and companionship. And as they shared both shadows and light, Grandmother Suki and Mr. Tanaka continued to weave an unspoken bond that transformed their lives and the lives around them. About instead of solely dwelling on what he found intolerable, Grandmother Suki unearthed a significant truth about acceptance within relationships. When you cease attempting to alter someone's core personality traits and instead attune yourself to the deeper needs these traits reveal, genuine connection becomes achievable, even with those whose approach greatly contrasts with your own. Additionally, she discovered that accepting an individual does not mean condoning every viewpoint they express or enabling detrimental behavior. It entails recognizing their humanity beneath the challenging patterns they exhibit. This means engaging with the individual rather than merely reacting to their troubling actions. Years later, when individuals sought Grandmother Suki's guidance on handling challenging relatives or neighbors, she frequently referenced her experience with Mr. Tanaka. She would explain that most individuals aren't intentionally difficult. Rather, they are manifesting their pain, anxiety, or confusion in the manner they've been conditioned to. If you can discern their true needs instead of fixating on the annoyance of their expressions, relationships can mend in unexpected and beautiful ways. This narrative illustrates how acceptance can revolutionize relationships from a foundational level. Grandmother Suki's transition from attempting to control Mr. Tanaka's behavior to merely receiving his expressions revolutionized the dynamic, even though his fundamental personality did not shift. The crucial takeaway is that those who pose challenges often become more manageable when they sense they are being heard, rather than judged. Mr. Tanaka's grievances served a purpose for him. They were his method of navigating overwhelming emotions concerning the changes in his life. With Grandmother Suki's recognition of this and her empathetic response rather than a dismissive one, he felt secure enough to reveal more vulnerable feelings. However, it is essential to recognize that not every challenging individual will fundamentally change through your acceptance. Certain personality traits are firmly established and may remain unaffected regardless of how you respond. Nevertheless, your experience in their presence can drastically shift when you cease opposing their nature and start collaborating with it. Observe how Grandmother Suki's practice enhanced her ability to remain patient in all her interactions. This is one of the many benefits of learning to accept individuals who are tough to deal with. They equip you with skills that enhance every connection you foster. Cultivating patience with someone who tests your limits nurtures a genuine sense of equanimity that extends into your more pleasant relationships as well. The tale also differentiates between acceptance and agreement. Grandmother Suki didn't begin to accept the validity of all of Mr. Tanaka's criticisms. She merely embraced the reality of his tendency to voice dissatisfaction. She acknowledged his feelings without assuming the responsibility of rectifying the issues he raised. This distinction carries significant weight in various relationships. You can recognize that someone possesses a pessimistic perspective without yourself adopting a negative outlook. You are capable of validating that someone is often critical without feeling the need to defend yourself against each critique. You can appreciate that someone processes emotions in a manner distinct from yours without endeavoring to alter their approach. Acceptance within relationships frequently demands that you relinquish the fantasy that others will fulfill all your desires or act precisely as you'd prefer. Instead, you learn to recognize the unique contributions people can offer, without expecting them to deliver what they are incapable of providing. Mr. Tanaka may not have been able to engage in the light, uplifting conversations that some individuals can cultivate, but he imparted honesty about the struggles inherent to the human condition, which held its own significance. He reminded Grandmother Suki that life encompasses hardships and that recognizing these challenges does not necessitate succumbing to despair. The essence of acceptance also encompasses acknowledgement that everyone operates at their best with their current understanding and emotional capabilities. This perspective does not excuse harmful behavior, but rather provides a context for responding wisely instead of reacting hastily. Sometimes, The most accepting response is transparent communication regarding how someone's behavior impacts you. However, this discourse is most effective when it arises from a desire for understanding rather than a demand for change. Saying, "When you critique my decisions, I become defensive and want to withdraw from our conversations," is far different from declaring, "You're overly negative and need to adjust your perspective." The former articulates your experience without casting blame on the other person, thereby promoting a constructive dialogue about improving your interaction. The latter fosters defensiveness and rarely leads to meaningful transformation. As you reflect on these insights about embracing others, pay attention to where you may be expending energy attempting to change individuals who haven't requested alterations. Recognize relationships where your frustration primarily stems from resisting someone's personality rather than stemming from specific harmful actions. This awareness doesn't imply you should become passive in the face of genuine issues or tolerate actions that violate critical boundaries. Rather, it invites you to discern between someone's irritating traits and their genuinely harmful behaviors. A Buddhist perspective on relationships embraces the notion that everyone is shaped by their past, their fears, and their restricted comprehension. The person who provokes your annoyance is navigating life through lenses shaped by experiences you may not even be aware of. While this insight doesn't make their difficult behavior any easier to endure, it can render it more comprehensible and thus more manageable to accept. In practicing acceptance of others as they are, you frequently realize that your resistance to their personalities was causing you more suffering than the traits themselves. The energy you previously devoted to transforming them can be redirected towards fully appreciating existence, acceptance, and growth through adversity. In the teachings shared by monks and educators, we find that embracing acceptance isn't a sign of weakness or foolishness. Instead, it hones our ability to choose wisely how to direct our energy. Rather than depleting ourselves by trying to alter others, we shift our focus to responding with wisdom to what they offer. This realization opens up a profound sense of liberation. You can cherish individuals without the need for them to change. Your principles can remain intact, even when those around you do not share your beliefs. You can feel frustration towards someone's actions without assuming their actions have to change for you to find peace. Allow yourself to rest in the potential that relationships can become lighter when you let go of the burden of improving others. Love can be more freely expressed when it isn't entangled with the obligation of fixing another person. Acceptance lays the groundwork for genuine connection in ways that resistance never accomplishes. Just like the mountains in these narratives, which stand firm regardless of the shifting weather patterns, we too can embody steady presence in our relationships. It isn't about changing those around us, but welcoming them with a consistent openness that allows their best selves to surface organically. Embrace the understanding that accepting others does not equate to giving up on improvement or evolution. It's about recognizing what lies within your control and directing your efforts where they can truly make an impact. Often, this shift begins not with transforming someone else, but in changing how we engage with what they present to us. In a beautifully maintained monastery garden, there resided an elderly monk named Enzo, who cherished the landscape with exceptional devotion. For 3 decades, he nurtured flowers, vegetables, and fruit trees that garnered admiration from visitors throughout the region. His garden was more than a hobby. It was considered a living testament to the principles of Dharma expressed through the earth and its flourishing life. Enzo had mastered techniques handed down through generations of monastic horticulturists. He understood which plants flourished in the shade, required full sun, how to amend the soil to suit various seasons, when to trim, and when to allow natural growth to unfold. The garden thrived under his watchful care, yielding bountiful harvests and stunning seasonal transitions that seemed to encapsulate the balance between human effort and nature's rhythms. Yet, one autumn brought an unexpected early frost. Without warning, temperatures plummeted far below seasonal norms overnight. Enzo woke to a devastating sight. The majority of his delicate plants had perished. The late-blooming flowers he had safeguarded throughout summer lay blackened and wilted. Crops intended to feed the community through winter were lost before they could be harvested. Walking through the ruined garden that morning, Enzo felt an unfamiliar anguish mixing with anger over the seeming randomness of his loss. All the meticulous planning, patient cultivation, and decades of knowledge suddenly felt futile against uncontrollable forces. His fellow monks anticipated that Enzo would face this loss with the calmness he'd exhibited during smaller setbacks in the past. They offered their comforting words about the inevitability of change and the cycles of growth and decay. However, during this moment of profound destruction, Enzo found these well-meaning teachings resonating hollow. Accepting the loss of a few plants was one thing. Watching the fruits of an entire season vanish overnight was an entirely different experience. For several days, Enzo kept his distance from the garden. When duties required him to be present, he rushed through the ravaged areas, addressing only the most essential tasks without his usual mindfulness. The sight of his devastated plants evoked a physical ache within him that he struggled to confront. His internal dialogue critiqued him for being overly dramatic, insisting that attachment to outcomes was the source of his suffering. Yet this rational understanding did little to alleviate the genuine pain he felt. A week following the frost, Enzo's teacher, Master Dogen, invited him to stroll through the damaged garden side by side. They ambled slowly along the paths where vibrant life had withered to brown stems and shriveled leaves. For an extended period, silence enveloped them. Eventually, Master Dogen halted beside a patch where Enzo's cherished chrysanthemums had flourished. The magnificent blooms he had nurtured for months to reach their peak in late autumn lay crushed, their vibrancy transformed to shades of brown and black. "Tell me, what do you see?" the master asked softly. "I see destruction, waste. All that careful work wasted," Enzo replied. "Look more closely. What else might you observe?" With reluctance, Enzo shifted his gaze. Initially, he noticed only the devastation he had been avoiding. But as he stood in the same spot, forcing himself to truly see, subtle details began to surface. The frost had indeed destroyed the tender flowering tops, yet many root systems remained alive beneath the surface. Several hardier perennials were showing green shoots emerging at their bases. Seeds from this season's flowers were scattered in the earth, some likely beginning the gradual journey toward next year's blossoms. "I see that some things survived," he acknowledged. "And what more can you discern?" This was a tougher inquiry. Enzo glanced beyond the flower beds at the areas where wild plants thrived along the garden's edges. The native grasses and trees, well adapted to the local environment over many years, bore no signs of frost damage. Their deep roots and resilient nature had withstood the same cold that had devastated his delicate cultivated plants. I see that the plants that belong here naturally were untouched, Enzo noted. Master Dogen nodded, affirming, the frost wasn't a personal strike. It was not retribution for your mistakes, but rather a part of nature's course. In your gardening efforts, it was simply a part of nature's rhythm. The distress you feel isn't from the frost itself, but rather from the belief that nature should adhere to your schedule instead of its own. They strolled through the sections where crops had thrived. Enzo noted that underground plants like carrots and potatoes seemed largely unaffected. In fact, these root vegetables appeared to have benefited from the chilling shock, their natural sugars heightened by the sudden drop in temperature. I had intended to harvest these over the span of several weeks, Enzo remarked, surveying the potato patch. Now, it seems they must all be collected at once. Is that truly a problem? It diverges from my original plan. More work packed into a shorter time span. Some might not store as well as if they were harvested gradually, but they still serve to feed the community. And indeed, they seem even sweeter than before. As they continued, Master Dogen recounted tales of other gardens he had witnessed, and other gardeners who had endured similar hardships. He spoke of droughts that taught communities new dimensions of water appreciation, torrential rains that unveiled which building foundations were genuinely steadfast, pests that showcased which plants had developed authentic resilience instead of just temporary defenses. Each challenge uncovers insights that stable conditions often obscure. The master elaborated, your garden has been a teacher about fostering growth under perfect scenarios. Now it reveals what thrives when conditions are less than ideal. Both insights are of importance. Enzo began to perceive his damaged garden in a new light. The plants that perished swiftly in the frost were frequently the ones requiring consistent care and delicate management. Their allure was real, yet their survival hinged on favorable circumstances persisting. The flora that managed to endure, though often less striking, demonstrated a stronger adaptability to unforeseen trials. He realized, I had been cultivating certain plants for their beauty rather than because they were suited for this environment. And now, I have gained insights into which approach fosters enduring achievement. In the weeks that followed, as Enzo toiled to clear the dead plant matter and ready the beds for winter, he found the manual labor helped him process his sorrow regarding the losses. Each plant he composted became nourishment for the soil that would sustain next year's growth. Nothing was truly lost. It merely transitioned from one phase of the life cycle to another. But beyond that, the abrupt loss had shattered something in his relationship with uncertainty. He had subconsciously operated under the belief that careful foresight and skillful labor could ward off significant hardships. The frost imparted the lesson that certain forces remain outside human command, regardless of preparedness or expertise. This understanding transcended gardening. Enzo started to recognize how frequently he approached all facets of life with the presumption that adequate effort must yield the desired results. The frost revealed to him that while this assumption could be a driving force, it also made him susceptible to the very kind of devastating disillusionment he had just faced. Eventually, spring arrived. ushering in a chance to implement what the challenging autumn had imparted. Enzo approached planting with a fresh perspective that year. He concentrated on native species that had proven their capability to weather local conditions. He crafted less intricate displays and more resilient ecosystems. He anticipated seasonal shifts rather than wishing for their mildness. The garden that evolved was less flamboyant in certain respects than his previous endeavors, but it held a sense of stability that his earlier efforts sometimes lacked. It seemed to resonate more fully with the landscape from which it emerged, and when the next early frost struck several years later, the damage was considerably less severe. The early frost served as a stern instructor. Enzo would later articulate to novice gardeners seeking to learn from his experience. Yet, it imparted lessons on resilience and adaptability that decades of favorable weather could not. He learned that beauty and durability need not be oppositional, and that working harmoniously within natural boundaries often yields better results than striving to overcome those boundaries through unceasing management. The Buddhist principle of dukkha, frequently interpreted as suffering, encompasses the idea that discomfort plays significant roles in conscious development. Like the frost in Enzo's garden, challenges often expose what is genuinely stable as opposed to that which only appears stable under protected conditions. When life contradicts our beliefs and intentions, we discover which parts of our comprehension can withstand adversity and which require re-evaluation. Enzo's initial reluctance to accept loss was a normal reaction. The garden embodied years of dedicated labor, and its ruin felt like a denial of all that effort. However, his readiness to closely examine the devastation ultimately allowed him to gain invaluable insights from this painful episode. He acquired knowledge about gardening, about his own anticipations, and about navigating uncertainty that would enhance his future endeavors to be more pragmatic and effective. The master's mentorship hinted at profound truths about how wisdom often arises from hardship. Challenges frequently reveal where our strategies need refinement. The frost underscored that Enzo had been prioritizing immediate aesthetic appeal over long-term viability, cultivation over adapting to local realities. This was not necessarily wrong, but rather incomplete, and the setback offered corrections that he might not have uncovered amid success alone. Similarly, pain in human experiences often operates in comparable ways. Relational issues illuminate patterns requiring attention. Health concerns uncover areas where lifestyle adjustments may be necessary. Work-related frustrations frequently highlight discrepancies between our expectations and reality. The insights derived from these challenging experiences can guide us toward more skillful reactions if we remain open to exploration. In a serene mountain village, there lived a fisherman named Kenji. He had learned the art of fishing from his father and grandfather, perfecting his craft over 2 decades on the same tranquil lake. Kenji understood the lake's temperaments, seasonal shifts, and the behaviors of fish as they navigated through varying depths. Fishing was more than a means of sustenance. It was a form of meditation, a practice in patience and attentiveness while providing for his family. Throughout the years, he established consistent patterns. He knew which parts of the lake would yield a good catch in different seasons, how weather changes would influence fish behavior, and the nuanced signals that distinguished favorable fishing days from challenging ones. His neighbors often admired his reliability. He consistently returned home with fish, even on days when others failed to catch anything. However, one spring, a significant shift occurred in the ecosystem of the lake. Intense rainfall in the mountains disrupted the water's temperature and nutrient balance. The construction of a new roadway altered the natural drainage, leading to a notable decline in fish populations that Kenji had been accustomed to over the years. Day after day, he ventured out with his usual gear to his favorite locations, only to return with empty nets. Initially, he believed this was just a temporary setback. Mountain lakes often experienced short phases of low yield. He experimented with various locations, changed his fishing times, and tried different baits and techniques. But despite his efforts, the situation did not improve over several weeks. His family's food supplies dwindled, and while his neighbors offered assistance, Kenji found it hard to accept. The practical issues were troubling, yet it was the emotional fallout that caught him by surprise. His identity had become intricately connected to his prowess as a fisherman. Kenji had taken pride in his ability to decipher the lake, providing a steady source of food based on his understanding of its patterns. When his skills no longer brought results, he felt a profound sense of disconnection that extended beyond mere worries about food and income. One evening, as he sat by the barren lake after another fruitless day, despair washed over him. Years of learning seemed to fade into insignificance. The once familiar lake now felt alien and almost hostile. This led him to question not just his fishing methods, but also his grasp of the natural world, his place within it, and his capability to handle uncertainty. Near the lake's edge lived an elderly woman named Grandmother Hannah, who had observed Kenji's struggles with empathy. She chose to hold off on offering advice until she sensed he might be open to it. That evening, she approached Kenji as he gazed into the still water. "The lake feels different these days," she said softly, settling next to him on the rocky shore. "It's not the same as it used to be," Kenji replied, bitterness evident in his voice. "Everything I've learned from fishing here seems pointless now." She paused for a moment before asking, "What did you gain from all those years of successful fishing?" Kenji reflected on this for a moment. "I learned patience. I learned how to interpret subtle signs, to adapt my approach to various conditions, and to remain quiet and attentive for extended periods." Hannah listened and then inquired, "Do you still have these qualities?" Kenji replied, "I suppose I do, but they don't matter when there are no fish to catch." After a few quiet minutes, watching the sun set and cast reflections on the water, Grandmother Hannah finally said, "I've lived beside this lake for 70 years. I've seen it undergo numerous changes. There were times when certain fish vanished completely, only to return years later. Other periods saw the emergence of new species. There were moments when the water itself seemed to pause." She looked at Kenji and asked, "How do you endure watching something you cherish transform beyond recognition?" Kenji thought carefully before answering, "I learned that to love the lake means to embrace all its phases, not just the ones that fulfill my needs. The lake does not exist solely for my benefit. It adheres to its own rhythms, responding to vast forces beyond my daily concerns." They shared a comfortable silence as stars began to dot the evening sky. Then, Grandmother Hannah posed another question. "What if this challenging time is imparting lessons that successful fishing could never teach you?" Kenji replied, What could it reveal that my 2 decades of good fishing didn't? What has this struggle disclosed about my relationship with uncertainty? He pondered her inquiry sincerely. It has made me realize that I had become reliant on predictable outcomes. I believed my skills ensured success. Once that assurance vanished, I felt powerless. "And what else?" she asked. Kenji continued, "I have recognized that my identity was too limited. I defined myself through my ability to catch fish rather than recognizing deeper qualities." "Indeed. And what have you uncovered about accepting help from others?" This was more challenging for him to admit. That my pride has made accepting support difficult, that I perceived myself as self-sufficient when, in reality, I relied on stable conditions. Grandmother Hannah nodded in understanding. The empty nets have been teachers as well, haven't they? As the months rolled on and Kenji continued to grapple with sparse catches, he began to implement these realizations in practical ways. He started accepting help from his neighbors whenever it was offered, thereby reinforcing community ties that he hadn't realized had weakened during his years of unbroken success. He acquired various skills to complement his fishing income, learning that expanding his abilities enhanced his resilience. Perhaps most crucially, he began to perceive uncertainty in a new light. Rather than viewing unpredictable outcomes as personal shortcomings, he recognized them as inherent elements of relying on wild systems that operate according to their own rhythms. This transformation did not diminish his preference for fruitful fishing days, but it lessened his distress during challenging times. The lake slowly regained some of its fish populations, though they never fully returned to what they were before the environmental shifts. As Kenji's nets started to fill once more, his gratitude for abundance had intensified. He no longer took successful fishing for granted, now acutely aware of how swiftly circumstances could alter regardless of human foresight and skill. The empty nets imparted lessons in humility he would later share with aspiring anglers seeking his wisdom. They revealed to me the distinction between expertise and control, and between confidence and arrogance. They uncovered strengths I hadn't recognized and exposed weaknesses I wasn't aware of. While I wouldn't wish to relive that tough period, I wouldn't exchange the lessons I gained from it either. The tale of the fisherman illustrates how setbacks can reveal dependencies and beliefs that success often conceals. When conditions were favorable, Kenji could maintain the facade that his skills ensured positive outcomes. Only when that assurance was stripped away did he realize both his excessive reliance on external supplies and his internal abilities to navigate uncertainty. Buddhist teachings acknowledge this dynamic throughout human experience. We frequently come to understand what we cling to only when it is threatened or taken away. We become aware of our expectations solely when they aren't fulfilled. We realize what genuinely sustains us only when superficial supports vanish. Kenji's empty net embodied what Zen philosophies occasionally refer to as profound doubt. Such experiences challenge fundamental beliefs and create space for a deeper understanding to take root. The comforting certainties that guide our daily existence can sometimes hinder growth, as they do not compel us to question or evolve beyond our current state. When the fisherman began to view himself as a learner navigating uncertainty rather than someone who should be immune to it, his relationship with hardship shifted. The empty nets morphed into sources of information rather than judgment, experiences instead of failures, and teachers rather than adversaries. Grandmother Hannah's outlook reflects the wisdom gained from observing numerous cycles over time. Having seen the lake through various stages, she understood that each era offered its unique lessons and gifts. What appeared as catastrophic change from a human perspective was merely natural fluctuation when viewed through the lens of extended timeframes. This recognition does not diminish the genuine difficulties that unforeseen changes can bring about. Kenji's family required sustenance, and his fishing abilities had fulfilled that necessity for many years. The pragmatic obstacles were real and demanded tangible solutions. However, the anguish stemming from the belief that the change was unwarranted or indicative of personal inadequacy was optional and could be alleviated through a shift in mindset. The fisherman's eventual return to more successful fishing, albeit under altered conditions, highlights another crucial aspect of what adversity can teach. Frequently, after grappling with significant challenges, we find that our previous capabilities resurface, now held more lightly. Triumph becomes a cherished outcome rather than an expectation, conditional rather than guaranteed, a gift rather than a given. Both Enzo and Kenji discovered that their painful journeys revealed essential insights into living with greater skill. The gardener learned to cooperate with natural limitations instead of incessantly combating them. The fisherman embraced a more humble view of his expertise while nurturing backup options for tough periods. These experiences were not mere consolation prizes for suffering, but authentic wisdom that arose from engaging with challenges consciously rather than merely enduring them. The composting method Enzo utilized for his deceased plants exemplifies how conscious beings can handle painful experiences constructively. Raw pain, akin to fresh organic material, often requires time and appropriate conditions to decompose into components that can nurture growth. Rushing this process or entirely bypassing it usually hinders the availability of nutrients. This indicates that healing from hardship often necessitates patience with our natural rhythms of integration. Just as gardens demand time between destruction and regeneration, humans frequently need phases of apparent inactivity while processing major challenges before new insights and skills can arise. Pain often delivers insights that pleasure can't provide. Comfort typically reinforces existing patterns and approaches, while discomfort alerts us when something demands attention or adjustment. Like a fever signaling infection, emotional or spiritual pain often indicates areas where growth is essential or healing is required. This observation does not imply that pain is pleasant or that we should deliberately seek it out. However, it suggests that when difficulties arise naturally, approaching them with curiosity instead of mere resistance can unveil valuable guidance on living with greater wisdom. The empty nets educated Kenji regarding humility, community, adaptability, and the essence of security, lessons that bountiful nets could never convey. The freezing garden imparted to Enzo lessons about resilience, sustainability, and the significance of aligning with natural constraints that unending growing seasons would have kept obscured. Ultimately, both men found that their distressing experiences enhanced their capacity for the very activities they believed were threatened by pain. Kenji evolved into a more flexible and modest fisherman. Enzo advanced to become a more adept and realistic gardener. The journey within, embracing the present moment, Their struggles fostered their development in ways that unbroken success could never replicate. Allow these narratives to settle in your mind now, without the need to apply them straight away to your life. The insights they offer do not require force or scrutiny to be beneficial. Much like seeds sprouting at the right moment when circumstances are favorable, truths often take root over time, revealing their significance when it's most pertinent. The Buddhist perspective on suffering as a teacher does not insist that you practice gratitude for your hardships or pretend that pain is enjoyable. It merely indicates that, since suffering is an inherent part of human existence, engaging with it through mindfulness and patience often yields more positive outcomes than responding with mere resistance and bitterness. Your own moments of discomfort hold crucial insights about what you need to understand, what calls for healing, where your beliefs may need revisiting, and what inner strengths remain underdeveloped. This wisdom becomes apparent not through intellectualizing pain, but by remaining present long enough for its lessons to emerge organically. The act of breathing beautifully illustrates this principle. Every exhale signals a small release, a letting go of what once was. Every inhale represents a new beginning, a welcoming of what lies ahead. This cycle encompasses feelings of loss and renewal alike, yet the entire process contributes to the ongoing journey of life. Nothing is wasted in the vast recycling of human experiences. Everything inevitably disintegrates into elements that foster new growth. Your anguish, your losses, your moments of confusion or feeling broken have all nourished the fertile ground from which your understanding continues to thrive. As we travel further on this path together, we arrive at an idea that may seem straightforward but is perpetually challenging: the present moment. This awareness is always accessible yet often overlooked while our minds drift to regrets from the past or apprehensions for the future. Zen practice gently guides a return to this awareness, not merely through strict discipline, but by unveiling that the essence of being present itself possesses a peace that makes returning to it feel like a homecoming. Tonight, we delve into how everyday instances can transform into gateways to deep tranquility when approached with simple attention. Nestled within a hillside forest, a monastery kept time not with bells or gongs, but with soft sounds that invited mindfulness rather than demanding it. There was no magnificent meditation hall adorned with intricate designs. Instead, the monks cultivated awareness amid their ordinary tasks, uncovering the sacred within the everyday rhythm of communal living. Brother Tishi held a humble position that he had fulfilled for over 15 years. Each morning and evening, he took care of sweeping the main pathway connecting the monastery buildings. It was not a complex duty. The path consisted of smooth stones interspersed with compacted earth, framed by meticulously maintained gardens on either side. In his early days at the monastery, as a youth, he approached this role with the efficiency acquired from his prior life as an urban laborer. Rise early, grab the broom and dustpan, move swiftly down the path, clearing leaves and debris, complete the task, and proceed to the next obligation. This work required around 20 minutes, if done with haste, leaving ample time for what he deemed the true practice of meditation and study. However, his mentor, an elder monk named Jisho, proposed an alternative mindset. The pathway teaches countless lessons to those who practice attention during the sweeping, he remarked one morning as Tishi hurried past with his tools. Perhaps it's worth uncovering what those lessons might be. At first, Tishi did not grasp what wisdom could arise from such a monotonous task, yet he respected his mentor and chose to explore a slower pace. The following morning, instead of hurrying through the sweeping, he intentionally took his time. He began to observe nuances he had previously missed. The way morning dew caused certain leaves to adhere to the stones while others lifted away effortlessly. How the sound of the broom varied depending on whether he was sweeping a damp or dry surface. Initially, this leisurely method felt counterproductive and a bit irritating. His mind wandered to other chores awaiting completion, the day's agenda, and reflections on teachings he had explored the previous night. However, gradually, his relationship with this straightforward work began to transform. He started realizing that the pathway exhibited different patterns each day. Some mornings brought a thick layer of fallen leaves that necessitated patient, methodical clearing. Other days revealed just a light scattering of debris that could be gathered quickly. Wet weather left muddy patches that required careful attention. Dry spells produced dust that demanded an entirely different technique for sweeping. Instead of perceiving these variations as hindrances to completing the task efficiently, Tishi began to appreciate them as insights into natural rhythms and fluctuating conditions. The pathway was imparting lessons about seasons, weather dynamics, and the life cycles of the flora and fauna surrounding it. What had once felt like mindless labor evolved into a dialogue with the environment. Perhaps even more significant, he became aware of the patterns within his own mind as he swept. Some days he felt vigorous and focused, gliding through the work with satisfaction. Other days, he felt drained or disengaged, making the same simple task feel burdensome. Some mornings, his thoughts were clear and sharp, while on others, a jumble of mental chatter distracted him from the immediate task at hand. Rather than critiquing these fluctuations in his mental state, Tishi learned to observe them with curiosity. He discovered that trying to impose concentration when his mind felt scattered often exacerbated the distraction. But accepting whatever state he found himself in, with kindness and an open heart, allowed him to reconnect with presence. In the midst of daily dedication, a truly remarkable revelation often unveils itself when one engages deeply with the ordinary. One particular morning, after having observed his newfound practice of attentive sweeping for months, Tishi encountered an unforeseen moment of insight. As he meticulously cleared a section of the walkway, fully immersed in gathering the fallen autumn leaves, there came a moment when his habitual mental chatter faded away. For about 10 to 15 minutes, there was only the rhythmic motion of sweeping. No contemplating the past or future. No inner dialogue critiquing the task at hand. Merely the seamless swish of the broom, the sound of leaves rustling, and the solid ground beneath his feet. This experience wasn't adorned with drama or mystique. Rather, it was an episode of pure engagement with the task in the present moment. The profound sense of tranquility enveloping those minutes surpassed any peace Tishi had previously encountered during structured meditation. There was no striving for a specific mental state, simply a natural immersion in the present task. Later that morning, when Jisho, his teacher, strolled by and inquired about his sweeping, Tishi felt compelled to articulate his experience. "Master," he began, "while sweeping this morning, I felt as if I vanished into the action. There was no sense of a separate self performing the sweeping. It was simply the act of sweeping itself. It was astonishingly serene, yet utterly normal. Jisho's knowing smile encouraged him to continue. "And what did you glean from this experience?" he asked. "That presence isn't something I have to force or fabricate. It's inherently accessible when I stop obstructing it." "Excellent," replied Jisho. "And what else?" Tishi pondered before responding. "Any activity can serve as a gateway to awareness if I impart true focus to it. The sweeping wasn't extraordinary in itself, but my level of attention rendered it special." Jisho nodded. "Yes, the path you tidy each day is likewise the journey to enlightenment, not due to any mystical essence of sweeping, but through the complete attention bestowed upon any moment, which discloses the essence of awareness." Over the ensuing years, Tisha's routine of sweeping in the mornings and evenings laid the groundwork for his spiritual journey. It was not a frame of rigidity or strictness, but rather a habitual chance to reconnect with presence, observe the quality of his awareness, and respond to whatever arose with acceptance and care. Some days the act felt ordinary, while others it led to an experience of deep stillness. Tishi learned to refrain from pursuing the extraordinary and to refrain from passing judgment on routine experiences. Every encounter with the path imparted teachings about remaining present for whatever was unfolding, rather than yearning for an alternative experience. News of Tisha's mindful approach to his simple chore spread among the other monks in the monastery. Younger practitioners grappling with traditional meditation began to inquire how everyday tasks could evolve into spiritual practices. Tisha's advice remained consistent. Select a simple task that you perform regularly for several weeks. Direct your entire focus to that task each time you engage with it. Observe what arises when you cease hurrying through it and instead fully participate in it. Many found that washing bowls with awareness was as transformative as sitting in meditation. Others realized that walking between buildings with authentic presence brought forth the same level of insight that years of studying sacred texts had aimed to illuminate. Within the monastery, a culture emerged where every action had the potential to be sacred when approached with mindful attention. Formal meditation instructs you to recognize the essence of presence, Tai Shi would explain to inquisitive visitors. But everyday life presents endless chances to nurture that presence amidst activity. Sweeping doesn't lead to enlightenment, but it reveals that enlightenment is intertwined with fully engaging in whatever you're experiencing in the moment. This narrative underscores the Zen perspective that enlightenment is not sought through escaping the mundane, but through encountering it with total focus. The path Tishi swept daily represented both the literal walkway connecting the monastery structures and symbolically, the journey toward comprehending the essence of awareness itself. What elevated a routine task into a spiritual endeavor was not the action, but rather the quality of presence Tishi applied to it. This realization points to a significant truth about the mechanisms of awareness. It exists independently of extraordinary circumstances or unique experiences. It remains perpetually accessible in every moment. When interactions are addressed without the influence of distractions, judgments, or desires to be elsewhere, the monk's discovery that presence arises effortlessly when interference ceases echoes a pivotal Zen insight. Awareness represents the inherent state of consciousness. The challenge lies not in creating awareness, but in recognizing and trusting the awareness that's innately present beneath the incessant flow of thoughts and inclinations. Tisha's initial method of sweeping mirrored how many navigate daily life: efficient, outcome-driven, focused on completion rather than participation. While this approach allows tasks to be accomplished, it often overlooks the deeper nourishment gained from engaging fully with present experiences. When Tishi embraced a slower pace and remained attentive, his everyday chores transformed into a gateway leading to the tranquility that structured meditation aspires to cultivate. The phenomenon of disappearing into the task unveils deep insights about the nature of self and presence. When total attention is directed toward the immediate experience, the typical sense of separateness often dissolves. The distinction between doer and action blurs, leaving only the activity itself emerging effortlessly within awareness. This dissolution of the subject-object divide, often articulated in mystical language, reveals how it can surface through even the most mundane tasks when approached with genuine intent, infused with genuine awareness. The sacred resides perfectly within the mundane. It emerges when we apply sacred focus to ordinary experiences. Brother Tishi exemplifies how embodied presence can inspire others within the monastery community, transforming awareness into something contagious rather than merely theoretical. Observing the tranquility and authenticity that resulted from Tisha's engagement with his simple tasks, other monks felt encouraged to explore their own daily habits with heightened mindfulness. The practical suggestion of selecting a routine activity and dedicating full attention to it provides a tangible pathway for cultivating present moment awareness. Instead of attempting to be mindful of everything all at once, concentrating on a singular repetitive task allows one to discern the distinction between distracted involvement and genuine engagement. In a quaint village nestled at the base of the mountains, a renowned tea master named Silito lived, famous for her extraordinary talent. Enthusiastic learners journeyed from far-off places to study under her, enticed by tales of the deep serenity that radiated from her artful tea preparation. Each of her movements flowed elegantly, each action intentional yet effortless, creating an ambience that made time almost feel suspended, with everyday stresses fading far into the background. However, Silito did not always possess this degree of presence and finesse. Years prior, when she embarked on her journey to master the way of tea, her approach mirrored her hectic lifestyle, treating it merely as another task to effectively complete before rushing on to the next item on her agenda. She memorized precise sequences, learned traditional forms, and acquired all the necessary tools and knowledge. Yet, something vital was absent from her practice. Her instructor, an elderly woman named Yukio, sought various approaches to guide Silito in recognizing what she was neglecting. However, Silito's impatience for immediate, tangible achievements often overshadowed the subtleties that true mastery required. She was eager to swiftly grasp the ceremony so that she might begin teaching and establish herself in this esteemed craft. One afternoon, after Silito completed what she regarded as a flawlessly executed tea preparation, Yukio offered an unexpected comment. "Your tea is made correctly," she stated softly. "But were you truly present while making it?" Silito felt confused and slightly on the defensive. "I followed every step meticulously. My focus never wavered from the established forms." Yukio countered, "Your awareness was on executing the forms correctly. But where were you in that process?" "I was right here, Preparing tea. Yukio fell silent that day but recommended that Silito spend the following week preparing tea solely for herself, not as practice, nor to showcase her developing skills, but simply to make and enjoy tea when she genuinely felt thirsty. This suggestion initially felt like a slight to Silito. After dedicating herself to acquiring expertise, now her teacher was urging her to retreat into informal practice. Nevertheless, out of respect for Yukio, she chose to follow this guidance, despite her frustration. The initial days of this informal tea preparation felt clumsy and without purpose. Lacking the structure of formal practice and the drive to impress a mentor, Silito found herself hastily completing the process just to satisfy her thirst. She rushed to boil water, grabbed any cup at hand, and paid little attention to the details she had painstakingly honed. However, slowly and surely, a subtle shift began to unfold. Freed from the pressures of performance and the unease of being judged, Silito discovered elements of the tea preparation process that had faded into the background during her formal studies. She became aware of the sound of water heating, evolving from stillness to gentle murmurs and ultimately to a rolling boil. She noticed how steam curled from the cup and how its warmth caressed her face as she lifted it to her lips, and most importantly, she truly savored the flavor of the tea, something she realized she had often overlooked while focused on technical precision. One morning, as she prepared her simple cup of tea prior to embarking on her day, Silito found herself moving more leisurely than usual. Not out of an intention to practice mindfulness or showcase presence, but simply because the soft morning light, the tranquility of the home, and the simple joy of warm tea on a chilly day felt incompatible with haste. As she poured water over the tea leaves, she observed that her breathing had become naturally slower and deeper. Her typical mental checklist for the day quieted, leaving only the immediate sensory experience of warmth, aroma, and the soothing sound of water cascading. At that moment, for the first time in her studies, she was entirely present with the task of making tea, no longer preoccupied with the act of preparing tea or executing the ceremony. As she raised the cup to her lips and relished the outcome of this organically mindful preparation, the contrast was breathtaking. The tea tasted richer and more nuanced, but beyond that, the overall experience was imbued with a level of depth and satisfaction that her technically perfect formal sessions had never managed to reach. Later that day, when she met with Yukio for her usual lesson, Silito eagerly recounted her morning tea experience. "Teacher, I think I grasp what you meant about the importance of being present. This morning, I wasn't focused on making perfect tea or correct practice. I simply made tea because I wanted it, and everything felt transformed." Tell me more about that transformation. When I concentrate on executing each step correctly, part of my awareness is always monitoring my performance, assessing if my actions are accurate and if I remember everything. But this morning, there was no assessment, just the immediacy of water, tea, warmth, and taste. Yukio smiled knowingly. "And how did that tea compare to your most technically flawless preparations?" 0. 5. Much better. The journey of tea. Not because my method was superior, but because I was genuinely immersed in the tea-making process rather than fixating on the steps. This is how one begins to grasp the essence of tea. The rituals and techniques matter since they liberate the mind from having to calculate the next step. Yet, their true aim is to carve out room for being present, not to turn into distractions in themselves. In the ensuing months, as Saleto further intertwined this awareness into her practice, her entire approach to the tea ceremony underwent a profound shift. Rather than merely executing a series of memorized movements, she embraced each action spontaneously as it unfolded. Instead of showcasing her proficiency in established forms, she viewed those forms as a foundation that allowed authentic presence to flourish. Anyone present for tea with her could immediately perceive the transformation. The previously tense atmosphere, marked by performance, evolved into one that felt open and serene. Attendees transitioned from passive observers to active participants in a collective meditation. The essence of the tea ceremony, as Saleto would later convey to her students, isn't solely about the tea. It represents an opportunity to cultivate complete presence through the simple act of preparing and sharing tea. When one is wholly engaged in the act of making tea, the tea itself becomes a medium for heightened awareness. Years down the line, as Saleto emerged as a revered teacher, she often recounted the lesson imparted by Yuko regarding the distinction between performing presence and truly being present. Many students exert themselves to project mindfulness, she would note. They move with calculated slowness, pay careful attention to details, and adhere rigidly to prescribed forms. However, this isn't genuine mindfulness. It's a case of pondering mindfulness while being distracted by other concerns. Authentic presence in any endeavor springs forth when one releases the attempt to appear present and begins to immerse themselves wholeheartedly in their actions. It's akin to the difference between observing yourself make tea and simply making tea. One approach resembles performance, even if you're the only audience. The other embodies true involvement. For Saleto, the way of tea evolved into a daily practice that transcended the confines of formal ceremonies. She infused the same quality of natural presence into cooking, cleaning, conversing, and enjoying solitude. Every task transformed into a chance to reconnect with direct experience instead of perpetually residing in thoughts about that experience. This narrative highlights how presence markedly diverges from the concentrated effort often conflated with mindfulness. Saleto's realization that the quality of her tea improved when she ceased striving for perfection indicates the difference between artificial attention and genuine awareness. When she focused on executing correctly, her attention was invariably divided. Some of her awareness was fixed on the immediate task, while another part continually monitored and critiqued her efforts. This internal split fostered a subtle tension that hindered total engagement with the experience. The unstructured tea preparation revealed what occurs when attention isn't split between doing and assessing doing. When her goal shifted from showcasing competence to simply savoring tea, her inherent awareness could fully immerse in the immediate sensory experience. This underscores a profound insight into how presence functions. It isn't something to be conjured through force, but rather something to be embraced by minimizing distractions. As the mind relinquishes the division between performer and performance, subject and object, awareness seamlessly merges with the unfolding moment. The forms and traditions of the tea ceremony held significant value for Saleto once she recognized their intent. They weren't ends unto themselves, but supportive frameworks that facilitated natural presence. By providing a structure for movements and focus, these forms freed her from incessantly deliberating on the next action, thus creating an opening for awareness to settle in the present experience. This underscores an essential truth about the nature of contemplative practices. Be it tea ceremony, walking meditation, or mundane daily activities, an outer framework can bolster inner tranquility. Nevertheless, this structure must be approached as a light container rather than an intrinsic part of the experience itself. Silito's teacher grasped that presence cannot be imparted directly since it isn't something you add to an experience. It's what is inherently present when mental commentary, assessments, and projections cease. The week of informal practice did not represent regression, but a revelation of what had been absent from her technical expertise. The shift in atmosphere when Silito began leading from authentic presence instead of rehearsed knowledge illustrates how awareness influences not just personal experience, but the quality of interactions and surroundings. A person's genuine presence invites others to be present too. Her understanding of the divergence between performing presence and simply being present extends far beyond the tea ceremony. In meditation, individuals often strive to look mindful, meticulously regulating their posture, breath, and mental states. However, such self-aware mindfulness might inhibit the natural absorption that emerges when attention aligns with direct experience. This principle is also evident in conversations, where effortfully listening to seem attentive differs from sincere engagement in what another is expressing. In the workplace, attempting to maintain mindfulness while performing tasks generates another quality of involvement than when one genuinely engages with the tasks at hand. Silito discovered that being present resembles falling asleep more than weightlifting. You cultivate the right circumstances and then allow something innate to unfold rather than coercing it into being. When she relinquished the ambition of crafting perfect tea and allowed herself to simply prepare tea with genuine engagement, the true essence of her experience emerged. The essence of presence and letting go. Attention and awareness surfaced independently. The narratives within this artifact converge on a fundamental lesson. Presence is not an accomplishment to achieve. It's a return to our true state. It's not something rarefied that requires specific conditions. Rather, it's the inherent outcome of engaging fully with the present moment. The monk sweeping the pathway and the woman brewing tea both realized that mundane tasks can become extraordinary through wholehearted involvement. This transformation occurs not because the tasks themselves have changed, but because focused attention uncovers attributes of richness, tranquility, and connection that fragmented awareness tends to overlook. This insight changes daily life from merely being a series of tasks into opportunities for authentic presence without the necessity of secluding oneself or adhering to elaborate meditation routines. Awareness can be fostered by directing complete attention toward what is occurring in the moment. Breathing stands out as perhaps the most immediate instructor of this principle. Each inhalation and exhalation is unique. This breath will never happen again in the same way. When attention naturally settles into the act of breathing without striving to control or enhance it, even the simplest act becomes a gateway to profound calm. The present moment is not a destination to reach. It's the only place we actually exist. The past and future live solely in our thoughts, even if those thoughts serve the purposes of planning or learning. However, life itself unfolds only in the now, amidst sensations, breath, and awareness. Recognize that even the act of reading these words is occurring in the present. The insights derived from them emerge from present awareness. There is no alternate location to uncover what these teachings reveal. There's no forthcoming moment when presence will be simpler or more fulfilling than it is right now. When presence becomes an innate quality rather than a tedious effort, daily life transitions without alteration. The same activities persist, but they are approached with growing intimacy instead of detachment. Engagement in work becomes richer when approached with total attention. Relationships deepen when presence is extended instead of merely physical closeness. Even challenges become more manageable when faced directly rather than through the filter of resistance and internal dialogue. The path is already laid out before you. The tea is ready for you to grasp. The moment you yearn for is invariably this one. Not because this moment is always agreeable, but because it's always authentic. And in that reality, embraced completely, lies the peace that thoughts can only contemplate, while presence can genuinely connect with. The present moment asks nothing more of you than to be present itself. And that presence demands nothing except the readiness to be exactly where you are rather than where you hope to be or where you wish you were. This readiness is enough. This moment is whole. This awareness is your sanctuary. As we continue our shared journey, we touch upon a subject that resonates with anyone who has ever endeavored to create outcomes: the attachment to results. The way we invest ourselves in work, relationships, or aspirations, only to feel disillusioned when things don't unfold as we envisioned. Tonight, we delve into a profound illustration of letting go, how to engage with full care and dedication while remaining lightly attached to the results. In a quaint village, a skilled carpenter named Hiroshi perfected his craft under the tutelage of his father and grandfather. For 2 decades, he meticulously constructed homes, furniture, and small structures, applying great craftsmanship and attention to every task. Each new project was approached with thorough consideration. He selected materials wisely, planned meticulously, and labored with the persistence that yields enduring quality. Yet, Hiroshi bore a weight that rendered his work more burdensome than necessary. He fretted incessantly over whether his clients would be pleased, whether his creations would endure as long as he anticipated, whether others would recognize the love he invested into each piece. Upon completing a project, instead of feeling fulfilled, he often lay awake pondering if he had made the right selections, if the wood would withstand the test of time, or if his craftsmanship was truly up to standard. This anxiety started to overshadow not only his slumber but also his enjoyment in the craft. While shaping wood or assembling components, parts of his mind constantly leaped ahead, envisioning how the finished product would be received. Instead of being fully engaged in the immediate act of crafting, he was mentally rehearsing discussions with clients or worrying about potential issues that might arise years down the line. One autumn, a venerable monk named Master Chen came to the village and commissioned Hiroshi to create a simple meditation bench. It was not a complex design, merely a low wooden seat intended for comfort during extended periods of practice. However, Master Chen had an unconventional request. "I would like you to craft this bench," he said, "but understand that I may never use it." Hiroshi was taken aback. Why would anyone order furniture they might not utilize? "I am quite old. Master Chen replied. "My time in this body may conclude before your work is complete. I may find that my knees become too stiff for sitting by the time the bench is ready. Or perhaps I may realize that I prefer a different practice altogether. I can't assure you that your efforts will result in the outcome you anticipate. Then why have me create it?" Hiroshi inquired. "Because crafting with care holds intrinsic value independent of how the final product will be utilized. I wish to commission quality work, not a promise of results." This notion bewildered Hiroshi, yet he accepted the task. As he commenced working on the meditation bench, Master Chen's words echoed in his mind frequently. For the first time in years, he was building something where the purpose might never be realized in the conventional sense. Yet the old monk had appeared genuinely content to commission this work. Initially, this uncertainty rendered the task odd and somewhat futile. If the bench might never fulfill its intended purpose, why invest his usual effort? The artisan's journey. Hiroshi meticulously chose each piece of wood, mapped out ideal dimensions for comfort, and polished every inch to a luxurious finish. Part of him considered taking a shortcut and crafting something merely sufficient, uncertain if it would ever be truly valued or utilized. Yet, a deeper part of him resisted that notion. His skilled hands instinctively sought to move with intention and care, yearning to maintain that dedication, regardless of the final outcome. As he worked the timber, he began to realize that his satisfaction stemmed not from envisioning the monk using the bench in the future, but from the pure joy of engaging skillfully with quality materials. Engaging in a project with uncertain results unveiled a truth that 2 decades of fixating on outcomes had concealed. He cherished the act of creation itself. The aroma of freshly sawed wood, the texture of the grain against his fingers, the delight of joints seamlessly interlocking. These joys were entirely independent of what transpired after completion. In the weeks that followed, as the bench neared its final form, Hiroshi discovered that his habitual anxiety regarding customer approval had vanished. Without the burdensome expectation of needing to validate his efforts through an outcome, he was free to relish the journey of crafting something both beautiful and practical. Each day was satisfying on its own, not just a means to a future acknowledgement. When Master Chen returned to take a look at the finished bench, Hiroshi was taken aback by his reaction. Rather than scrutinizing the craftsmanship or testing for comfort as other clients would, the elderly monk gently placed a hand on the smooth surface of the wood and smiled. "This has been created with love," he remarked softly. "How can you tell?" Hiroshi asked, intrigued. "Because affection manifests in the care poured into small details. Observe these corners, this smooth finish, and how these pieces align so well. Such meticulousness is born when a person truly immerses themselves in their craft, rather than focusing on what that craft may yield." Master Chen indeed incorporated the bench into his life during his remaining months, but of greater significance to Hiroshi was the insight their discussion had shed on his overall relationship with his work, drastically altering his view of carpentry from that moment onward. "I once believed that favorable results validated my craftsmanship," Hiroshi would later share with his apprentices. "However, I came to understand that the merit of good work is its own reward. When you create with attentiveness and skill, that dedication remains, irrespective of whether the final product resonates with anyone's expectations. The wood absorbs your focus. Your hands gain greater finesse. Your mind cultivates patience and precision. These rewards are independent of the fate of your creations. Now, as he worked, he still wished for favorable outcomes, but he no longer leaned on those results for fulfillment. True satisfaction arose simply from performing the task well, from being fully present in every moment, from dedicating his abilities entirely to the endeavor at hand. This transformation in mindset extended beyond Hiroshi's workshop. Customers started noticing a distinctive quality in the furniture he produced. It resonated with a sense of grounded craftsmanship and meticulous attention, causing even the simplest pieces to radiate uniqueness. When questioned about this newfound quality, Hiroshi would share that he had transitioned to crafting for the joy of the creation process rather than solely the end result. When you cling to specific outcomes, he would explain, a portion of your energy shifts toward anxiety over those outcomes instead of into the work itself. However, when you relinquish the need for particular results and commit to working skillfully, you can channel more of your energy into the task. Often, the results end up improving, but importantly, you also savor the journey. This narrative exemplifies a concept that transcends carpentry. When we tether our sense of success and fulfillment to specific outcomes, we often hinder our ability to achieve those very objectives. Concerns about results fragment our focus between our current actions and potential future scenarios. Yet when we uncover fulfillment in the quality of our endeavors, we can devote our entire presence to our current efforts. Hiroshi's experience illustrates that maintaining a loose grip on outcomes actually enhances the likelihood of their success more effectively than a tight hold. His craftsmanship improved without the burden of worrying about how it would be received. His enjoyment of carpentry flourished when he stopped measuring his work against future recognition. The Buddhist perspective of non-attachment illuminates this truth. Clinging to results frequently obstructs the very actions that might yield favorable outcomes. When you desperately wish for a specific outcome, that desperation usually diminishes your effectiveness in achieving it. But when you can fully commit to the process while accepting whatever results may follow, your performance often improves and your stress diminishes. Master Chen's request served as a lesson about the distinction between caring for one's work and being fixated on its reception. To care means to invest your complete focus and skill into your task. Attachment refers to the need for outcomes to affirm your worth or efforts. The first fosters exceptional work, while the latter may detract from it. Hiroshi discovered that fulfillment could arise from the craft itself, rather than solely from external endorsement. This does not imply that outcomes lack significance. Rather, it affirms that outcomes assume a secondary role when weighed against the quality of engagement you invest in your efforts. When the work itself is reward enough, positive outcomes become gifts, not obligatory expectations. This principle reverberates throughout all aspects of human endeavor. Students often experience enhanced learning when their attention centers on comprehension over grades. Athletes frequently perform better when immersed in the sport rather than preoccupied with winning. Artists tend to produce superior work when engaged in the creative process, rather than primarily seeking recognition. The artisan story also reveals how non-attachment enriches the creative journey. embracing uncertainty in farming. In a serene valley, a resilient woman named Medora dedicated her life to cultivating vegetables for her community. She immersed herself in extensive research on sustainable agricultural practices, gained invaluable insights from seasoned gardeners, and invested countless hours nurturing the soil, sowing seeds, and tending to her crops with immense hope and dedication. However, she soon discovered that myriad uncontrollable variables influenced her farm. A sudden weather change could obliterate months of meticulous labor within hours. Pests might favor her organic produce over the conventionally grown options of her neighbors. Crop diseases could proliferate despite her best preventive measures. Even on her best days, market fluctuations could render her bountiful yields nearly worthless. In the initial years of her agricultural journey, these uncertainties fostered persistent anxiety within Midori. She obsessively monitored weather predictions, fretted over every pest, and lost countless nights of sleep during critical growth periods. When setbacks occurred, she internalized them as personal shortcomings, evidence of her inadequate effort or lack of foresight. The most challenging season unfolded during her fourth year when a late spring frost decimated her early crops, followed by a summer drought that strained the replanted vegetation and autumn rains that ruined the remnants ready for harvest. By the winter, despair weighed heavily on Midori. All her acquired knowledge and sweat seemed futile against forces far beyond human control. In the face of her ongoing difficulties, Kenji, an elderly farmer from a nearby valley, became aware of her plight and reached out to offer insights gleaned from 40 years of experience. They began meeting monthly throughout the frigid winter months, and these discussions eventually prompted Midori to reassess her understanding of farming. Kenji remarked, "You're attempting to dominate the uncontrollable." He listened intently to her methods, explaining further, "You operate under the assumption that if you plan meticulously and exert effort, you'll achieve perfect outcomes. But that's not how agriculture operates. Weather exhibits patterns far grander than a single season. Pests and diseases react to unpredictable conditions. Even the soil adheres to its own cycles, often misaligned with human desires. But if I can't dictate the results, what's the purpose of my efforts in farming?" asked Midori, puzzled. Because cultivating food successfully necessitates immense skill and focus, even if those attributes don't guarantee specific outcomes. It's about mastering the art of understanding soil conditions, timing plantings judiciously, and identifying problems early on. These competencies hold value regardless of whether any one crop succeeds, Kenji elaborated. He shared his own philosophy in navigating farming's unpredictability. Each season, I cultivate the land with utmost care and diligence, applying all my knowledge on crop selection, soil preparation, water management, and pest control. However, I proceed with the understanding that one year might bless me with abundance, another may yield losses, and most will yield mixed results. How do you cope with the disappointment when yields fall short despite your hard work?" Midori inquired. "I mourn the losses, glean what wisdom I can from the experience, and begin preparing for the next season. The failed crops impart as much knowledge, often more, than those that thrive. Each season enriches my understanding, irrespective of its impact on my income." As Midori absorbed Kenji's tales of variable harvests, She began to view farming not as a battle for victory, but rather as a relationship that be nurtured. The land, weather, crops, and pests formed an intricate ecosystem that she could learn to coexist with, though mastery would never be complete. I once believed that embracing uncertainty implied passivity, she confessed to Kenji during one of their winter exchanges. But hearing your journey, I realized that accepting uncertainty can augment my effectiveness as it frees me from squandering energy on unchangeable factors. Precisely, Kenji agreed. When you relinquish the expectation that every season must yield success, you are empowered to engage each season as it unfolds. Wet years demand different tactics than arid ones. Seasons plagued by pests require distinct strategies from those that are pest-free. Resisting unfavorable conditions wastes energy, while cooperating with them conserves it for meaningful action. The ensuing spring saw Midori approach farming with a renewed mindset. She diligently researched crop varieties, prepared the soil with thoughtfulness, and devoted herself to her plants with the same care as before, but now with a lighter grip on her expectations. Rather than insisting on specific results for a sense of achievement, she focused on skillfully navigating whatever challenges presented themselves. When late frosts threatened her young plants, acceptance replaced discouragement. She shielded the protectable and accepted the loss of what couldn't be saved. When unusual rainfall patterns struck in summer, she adapted her watering and drainage plans without lamenting the shift in weather behavior. When pests appeared, she responded with composure rather than viewing them as personal affronts. This strategic shift yielded benefits beyond mitigating anxiety and disappointment. Midori realized she was able to make improved decisions when freed from the pressure to control outcomes. Her evaluations became clearer, her responses more suitable, and her capacity to learn from both triumphs and missteps enhanced. Her farming prospered not because she cared less about success, but because clarity of thought replaced the turmoil of desperately clinging to specific hopes. Over time, her relationship with farming evolved from one of struggling against uncertainty to a harmonious dance with the natural cycle. Farming wisdom. Midori's outlook shifted profoundly over the years. While she still favored bountiful harvests over meager ones, she no longer viewed poor yields as failures or sources of despair. Instead, they morphed into insights regarding circumstances, chances to cultivate resilience, and opportunities to practice accepting what lies beyond her control while continuing to influence what she could. Farming instilled in me the understanding that relinquishing the expectation of guaranteed outcomes doesn't equate to abandoning care. Midori would later share this with novice farmers, emphasizing that it's about nurturing a sense of commitment that can endure through disappointments. When satisfaction arises from the quality of farming itself rather than specific results, the heart remains steady even during challenging years. I discovered that nature is not an adversary to my efforts. It merely exists as it is, adhering to patterns and rhythms far grander and older than any human intention. By aligning with those cycles rather than insisting they adhere to my schedule, farming evolves into a collaborative experience instead of a struggle. Years later, Midori was recognized not only for producing excellent food, but also for her steadiness and good spirits amidst the uncertainties that often plagued other farmers, leading them to bitterness and anxiety. When inquired about her calm demeanor, she credited Kenji's teachings on the distinction between controlling results and shaping conditions. This understanding is also encapsulated in Buddhist teachings on karma, that actions inevitably produce repercussions, yet these unfold within frameworks far greater than one's individual control. Skillful endeavors can influence results, yet they cannot be dictated solely by sheer will. This realization fosters both humility and liberation. Tomorrow will present fresh opportunities to embrace this art of letting go, new chances to offer your utmost while remaining indifferent to the outcomes. Each moment brings an invitation to find fulfillment in the act of doing good rather than solely in achieving positive results. In this practice, something essential within you will continue to mature and develop. Whether you notice it, whether others acknowledge the transformation, or whether this growth aligns with your preferred timeline, the journey persists, not by virtue of controlling its trajectory, but by sincerely and attentively traversing it. That is sufficient. It has always sufficed. Embrace this simple adequacy. As your breath gradually slows and your body relaxes, allow yourself to appreciate the gentle completeness of this shared journey. Traverse muddy trails and face unexpected downpours. Recognize the wisdom of transience and nurture self-compassion. Through acceptance of others and the lessons gleaned from sorrow, through presence and the act of letting go, you've been engaging with the most innate aspect of existence. The sheer willingness to embrace life as it unfolds. Acceptance is not a state you achieve once and retain perpetually. It is a recurring practice, revisited each time life introduces something novel, challenging, or beautiful. Every breath presents a new opportunity to ease resistance. Each moment encourages you to opt for presence instead of struggle. Every encounter with adversity offers a chance to remember that resisting what is already in place only inflicts additional suffering onto what is naturally challenging. There's no requirement to recall every detail from these narratives and lessons. Perfection in acceptance or the absence of frustration is unnecessary. You simply need to comprehend that there's always an alternative approach to whatever arises, one that acknowledges your humanity while delivering something deeper than mere reactivity. This path honors your emotions but doesn't allow them to take control. It provides a forward motion that flows with life rather than perpetually pushing against it. Acceptance is navigated one step at a time, one breath at a time, one gentle allowance at a time. Rest within this understanding now. Allow sleep to envelop you naturally, without force or resistance. Let your dreams guide you softly through the night cycles of rest and rejuvenation. And remember, upon waking, acceptance will be there for you, patiently waiting like an old friend, ready to greet the new day with the same tranquil wisdom that has accompanied you through the night's passage toward peace. Sleep well, and thank you for being here with us.